Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. I apologize for the longer hiatus, but I did warn you this time, so the apology is rather short and sweet because I am back to a relatively regular streaming schedule, about 2 to 3 times a week, and obviously a lot more when the iPhone event starts hitting. And boy, do we now know when the iPhone 17 event is actually hitting because Apple did post an invite to their awe-dropping event on September 9th, 10 a.m. Pacific time. Feel free to translate that to your own time zone. Obviously, if you add it to the calendar through Apple's website, it will automatically do the math for you. We can see the live animated Apple logo. So this is not simply a video like it usually is. It's also not an augmented reality demo like we used to get in the past. No, it's actually a pretty unique thing where you see this is me interacting with it by just moving my mouse cursor around. And if I click it, I think it slightly changes the intensity of the effect, but not by much. Obviously, that's because it needs to work with regular touch input for people accessing the website from iPhones and iPads and, well, any other smartphone, tablet device, any other touchscreen device, but also with mouse and keyboard. Well, this is all we pretty much needed to know because we have a lot of rumors, a lot of leaks leading up to the iPhone 17, 17 Air, 17 Pro, 17 Pro Max, and some other devices that we expect to see at this event, including an Apple Watch. Well, to be more precise, a new Apple Watch generation consistent of a new Apple Watch SE, an Apple Watch Series 11, and an Apple Watch Ultra 3. And beyond that, also potentially, hopefully, AirPods Pro 3s. Mark Gurman is absent this weekend from what I've heard, so he's most likely posting a big Power newsletter sometime next weekend. I'll hope to be reacting to that as soon as possible with you guys. But obviously, whenever other leaks, whenever other big rumors drop, I'll be here for that as well. So, what do we get from the animated Apple logo here? Usually, you guys know I tell you to take any kind of hyper analysis of these invites with a pinch of salt. The teams that are doing the invites, the marketing guys, they don't always even know everything about the new product. That's to prevent way too aggressive leaks and stuff like that. That being said, my two takeaways here, well, three and, well, 1.5. It really depends on how you count. First is you see a general liquid glass aesthetic here. That is not surprising. It's way less glass as it is very much about the shimmering effect and the reflections around the edges. That is very much clear because obviously all iPhone 17 models will come with iOS 26 pre-installed, so they will feature the full liquid glass right away, which of course kind of contrasts to devices like the Pixel 10, which are launching with Android 16 and Material 3 Expressive. But Material 3 Expressive is still like every day there's like, oh, and now this Android app, and by Android app I don't mean like a third-party app, I mean like a Google-made Android app. Yeah, this one is getting a Material 3 Expressive today and this one tomorrow, and I'm like, why not launch all of them simultaneously? But that was kind of clear to us. The other two takeaways are kind of one takeaway, which is colors. And the colors here you see are blue primarily and an orange tone. Whether you take it as orange, as you can see, it also becomes quite intense red depending on how you click it. To me, that can be a little bit of a hint to, especially for the 17 Pro, where we are rumored to be getting a new blue color and a new orange or copper or reddish gold color, whatever also in the end it's going to be called. That's also going to be interesting. So that is kind of like my 1.5 to 2 to 2.5 to 3 takeaways from this Apple logo. I think I've seen some people try to interpret even more into it, but I think that's a little bit much. I already see Riley in the chat saying, I guess you saw the new benchmarks. Also, hi, Mark. I don't know if it's just a hi to me or it's a joke referencing the room, but I'll just say, oh, hi, Mark. And thank you, Riley, as always, for joining the chat, our master yapper here on this channel. We have Max Maximus, long-term supporter of this channel, joining with both a memberstone chat and a super chat with his member milestone chat. He is saying, hope we get a lot of good content out of the iPhone 17. Well, it is going to be more than, for example, you guys got from me for the iPhone 16 series, because with the iPhone 16, I obviously didn't buy it. I watched reviews, I watched camera comparisons with you guys, but it simply wasn't me actually testing out the product. Down the line, I actually got to play a lot with iPhone 16 Pros mainly, and a little bit with the smaller iPhone 16, so the non-Plus variant, and I've gotten to really like and appreciate those products. And that's, for example, why I am a defender of camera control. It's not just because in theory I appreciate the button, but even from my own personal experiences working with camera control, or using it, working is a hard word, I do appreciate camera control. I don't think it's perfect. I would prefer the button to be elevated rather than to be like an indent in the device. But yeah, I like it. I also like the battery life of the 16 Pro a lot when I used it. So, but this time around, you will actually get full-on unpackings on the channel and full-on reviews, including my own comparison between my old 15 Pro Max and now the 17 Pro Max. I've already put the money by the side for the full purchase, so we should be clear. I hope I get it as soon as possible. And with a €2.49, thank you, Max, for that super chat. He's saying, here's a coin to one of my favorite streamers. Well, to one of your favorite streamers. I guess I'm not the favorite one, so I guess I'll have to work on that at least a little bit. We have Rosa joining the chat saying hello, and we have Benveni, our MarkTech Pro Max only supporter over on Patreon, as far as I know, saying hello, Mark. It feels like iPhone 16 lineup was released a few months ago, not a year ago. I do understand what you mean. It's not just the general passing of time where, like, when we get older, time kind of passes by so quickly relatively, but I do understand that, quite honestly, the world has been pretty chaotic. The political situation over the last 2-3 years has been chaotic. Before that, we got the pandemic, which was also chaos, but in a very different way, kind of where everything slowed down, right? Now we have everything happening so quickly. Even just when we discuss Apple over here, right, we have to consider shit like tariffs by the United States, and the United States kind of being on a war foot with China, maybe not in actual war, but like economically. Yeah, so I do understand why it feels like from the iPhone 16 on, it really doesn't feel like a full year has passed. In fact, like the fact that it's been exactly a year, right, basically in terms of timelines from when Apple sent the invite to the event, that's kind of crazy, right? So it's basically like as close to 1 year from it. Sorry if you heard any like kind of double noise early on. That's because I always have my stream open on my iPad to check on the quality and to read your chats, and I didn't fully disable the volume, so that should be solved now if that was a problem for you, which is very important because we are going to be watching some videos later on, especially about the Pixel 10, so hopefully no double audio over there. As always, let me know about the audio quality, video quality, and now that we have some intro yapping out of the way, please consider supporting the channel, subscribing, liking, sharing, commenting. You guys know I love interacting with a lively live stream, getting your opinions, your agreements, your disagreements. Please join the Discord. You'll find the link to that in the description of this channel. And of course, you can support this channel very directly with super chats and super stickers. Whenever you catch me live, you can become a channel member right here on YouTube. Shout out to Angelica, Max, Steve, and Jonathan, our MarkTech Pro Max supporters over here. And you can also become a regular supporter over on Patreon. Shout out again to Ben Veni, our MarkTech Pro Max supporter over there. We have Fluxpoint showing the chat saying, the reason why time passes by so quickly is because of daily routines. If you do more exciting and thrilling stuff, it should go slower. Don't know if I remember correctly though. That's exactly correct, and that is why for kids, for whom even daily routine is somewhat new, or at least like even with regular school stuff and before that kindergarten, everything they see, learn, experience is relatively new. So to them, plus their brain just has a better capacity to experience everything anew and learn. That's why for them time passes slower, or at least the same amount of time feels like it packs a lot more stuff in it than it does for us adults. That's absolutely correct. That's pretty basic neuroscience, especially in terms of like neurological development. So thank you, Flexpoint, for that detail. Yeah. Yeah, and even just for me, just as a personal example, because I guys told you I was on a longer hiatus. A friend of mine was visiting for a few days here. Before that, I was spending time with family, and I just really noticed that each day felt a lot longer than it does even with work, because my work is pretty packed, but then in comparison to a completely regular day where it's like a weekend where I try to do as little as possible to just calm myself down, to relax, to maybe absorb some news, some stories. Like, yeah, that's just a completely different like a passage of time. It's not even funny, right? Being constantly on the go, constantly experiencing new things. And this is why like the meme of go out and touch grass, it's not really just to distract people from the topic at hand, or because you disagree with a person. Sometimes it really would help a person to go out and to actually focus their brain by doing more than just doom scrolling on the internet. Yeah. Ben Vinny saying, so basically I met your channel a year and 6 months ago, since I found because of WWDC 2024. So that's a little bit over a year, not quite a year and a half. Wait, no, you might have actually met it before, right? WWDC 2024. Yeah, well, we have a couple of regulars here, some even longer. I see just from the membership milestone chat from Max that he's like a member for 13 months. So yeah, I appreciate each and every one of you, whether you tune in live or you tune in afterwards. I know a lot of you, just because of time zone differences, prefer to watch afterwards. So thank you to each and every one of you. Ben Vinny saying, I have video suggesting to watch CNET iPhone 17. Yeah, I don't think I've really enjoyed CNET for like years and years. And I'm not saying that they're bad, right, in the way that I sometimes like will destroy a channel like Linus Tech Tips for the way they do certain content. I just think that their general presentation style, at least back when I used to watch them, or to be more precise, when I used to watch them and then transition to not watching them, it felt kind of boring and not so exciting. But who knows, maybe they have changed. Just as a quick outlook for the Pixel 10, later on we will be watching Dave 2D's video camera comparison between the Pixel 10 Pro XL and the iPhone 16 Pro Max, and we're going to watch MKBHD's Pixel 10 Pro review. I know some of you might want me to watch something very in-depth like Petapixel's camera review of the Pixel 10, but to be honest, the camera changes this year are so minor. I honestly think this 5-minute video by Dave 2D tells you all you need to know. And then there are, especially about video, and then about stills, quite honestly, very little has changed. And that's what you're also going to see reflected in MKBHD's video. Just to also excite you for some future stuff, obviously, I did now explain to you that the event is dropping. It's now 10 days until the event. So, man, time passes even faster. But obviously that includes the iPhone 17, 17 Air, 17 Pro, the Apple Watch Ultra 3. I think that with the Series 11, we expect a little bit less of an upgrade because obviously we got the Series 10 last year, while the Apple Watch Ultra 2 will be 2 years this year, right? So we expect a much larger jump for the Ultra 3, and we also, some of the technologies that we'll be discussing for the Ultra 3, they will be shared between the Ultra 3 and the Series 11, maybe even partially by the new Apple Watch SE. Guys, we have quite a few people watching right now. Please, if you're enjoying this, leave a like button. Please let me know what you think in the comment section, in the live chat, because this really helps me improve myself. It really helps the video find new people, especially when you're watching live, especially when you're contributing live. And hey, down the road, it just helps you connect better with me, and it helps me better attract you to future videos, right? There's also one fun news story which I missed in the last week, which is also from Majin Buu, who now has a pretty large track record, actually. It's not just that he sometimes will just randomly share something on Twitter, but now on his dedicated website, he actually does some pretty decent breakdowns of the rumors he posts. So while I'm not sure, of course, how much of it will turn out to be exactly true, right? This stands in stark contrast to Mark Gurman, who does not do as in-depth analysis of his own rumors, right? A lot with Mark Gurman is like, oh, here are like 3 sentences, and try to interpret it however you see fit. That way, Mark Gurman remains right in the end anyway, right? With Majin Buu, because he posts like images and 3D models and whatever, for one, it's much more exciting to engage with, but it's also much easier to actually like track his track record, right? Because, well, if it doesn't look like this, the crossbody strap and the new accessory developed by Apple, well, then we'll know he was actually wrong. Fluxpan saying, I don't like what I heard from the iPhone 17 Air. It just sounds like it's being forced to be thin, because it is. And just a phone being thin will not be a good marketing point for me. I've said it time and time again on this channel. I don't think this device is for enthusiasts. However, I've also said that obviously about devices, for example, that don't have ProMotion screens, right? Where I said, look, if you want 120 hertz, I'm sure down the line it will come to cheaper models as well. But for now, Apple treats it like an enthusiast talking point. So please look into the Pro market, whether it's the current generation or maybe you buy the previous generation at a discounted price. However, with the iPhone 17 Air, I'm not simply treating it as like a less enthusiast grade device. I honestly believe that the compromises of the 17 Air make no sense to me. I think the battery is way too small if it's actually 3,000 milliampere hours rather than 3,600 or 4,600, right? Which 4,600 is kind of what we would expect, or even higher, from a device with a 4.6, 4.7 inch screen. The other point, of course, is a single camera, even if it's the even better main camera of the Pros rather than the slightly smaller main camera of the regular models. That's not really enough to compensate for the removal of the ultra-wide. And obviously, if in price point it starts to get closer to the Pro models, now you also have to consider that those don't just have telephoto cameras, but this year we're actually getting much better 48 megapixel telephotos. We have the amazing optical image stabilization that we've had since the iPhone 15 Pros. We have the 5x zoom. We have potentially variable zoom feature, especially maybe on the Pro Max. And then you have my personal pet peeve, and that is the removal of actual stereo. Now, I'm pretty sure that Apple will be able to put in what are technically stereo speakers just in the top bar, right? Well, right over the dynamic island. But my problem with that is that will just be worse than basically every iPhone since like the iPhone 10, 10s days, right? Like, which obviously have like the combination of a very strong bottom speaker and the front facing speaker that's also like your earpiece. And that to me are just compromises that pile up. And to me, that would put the product more into the $600 to $700 price zone. But because it has to be made out of titanium, because it has to compensate for being so thin, because there's an engineering challenge in making it so thin in general, to me, the iPhone 17 Air exists because Apple is making a foldable. For that, they were experimenting with how to make a device as thin as possible. And to me, the iPhone 17 Air is basically just an iPhone foldable, kind of cut in half, and I don't like that. So I agree with you, Flux Point, on this. Riley saying, bros yapping about the strap. Jesus Christ. What has the world gone to? Well, I mean, I do yap about everything new, right, in the world of Apple. I don't necessarily yap about everything for the same amount of time, so I still prioritize somewhat, Riley. But yeah, I did find this still obviously less exciting than like rumors about AirPods or Apple Watch, and then of course the iPhone or iPad. But hey, it's still worth covering. And by the end, we'll be talking more about processors. I know that a lot of the viewers, especially the regular ones on this channel, really enjoy some processor comparisons. We are finally getting more info about Samsung's 2nm based. But though, to be honest, Samsung's 2nm is kind of a rebranded 3nm. However, it is GAAFed, so second, third generation 3nm should be potentially competitive with TSMC's N3P, and down the line, they should be putting out real 2nm, which would then be more competitive with TSMC's upcoming 2nm and N2P, and eventually A16 nodes. Yeah, Riley, I know you love yourself some chip yap, some chap, I guess. Yeah, so plenty of for you guys to look forward to. I would like to start with just some general iPhone 17 summaries. I don't think I have to go to anything crazy today, because I think that basically everyone who watches this channel has either followed me or has generally followed iPhone 17 rumors. So first, of course, is the redesign, and that also comes with the big question mark that still has not been fully answered to me, which is the iPhone 17 Pro actually switching from titanium to aluminum? Is it actually getting like this glass cutout kind of in the middle? We pretty much got confirmed that the Apple logo is repositioned, that MagSafe gets the redesigned around the Apple logo, and of course that the camera island is now this elongated bar where the LED flash, the microphone, and the LiDAR scanner are separate from the triangular camera system. Supposedly the glass on the back in general will stay matte, except for the camera island where it will be glossy. So it is still inheriting a lot of design elements from previous iPhone generations. If you are in the market for a complete redesign, I do encourage you to wait, unless you kind of cannot afford, because maybe your device just isn't good enough anymore. I know some people will complain if they're switching away from titanium to aluminum, that it's a cheaper material, less premium, so to speak, less durable. That being said, aluminum is lighter, it's cheaper, so it's Apple can actually reinvest those savings into other parts of the device, and there are parts of the device that are unmistakably becoming more expensive, like the use of a vapor chamber heatsink rather than the traditional graphite heat cover for the processor. So Apple might need it, not that their profit margins wouldn't allow for the inclusion of titanium, but hey, Apple is in the market of making as much profit as possible. We all know that. Aluminum also has other benefits versus titanium. It's easier for radio waves to go through it. So while I'm still sure that Apple will keep like the cutouts on the sides, those plastic cutouts where the antenna lines as we know them, but Majin Buu has also posted how part of the new antenna design of the 17 Pro is focused right around that camera bar. So that elevated position and going right into the chassis. Supposedly Apple is using this to have a very good antenna system here. Gonna be interesting how that works with the latest Qualcomm modems and also Apple's own Wi-Fi 7 modems that will be part of the entire iPhone 17 series. Aluminum is also better for heat transport, so that will make it work better together with the vapor chamber heatsink that I've already mentioned. That should help distribute heat across a larger area in the device. And also a small tidbit for maybe enthusiasts, but a big thing for everyone who is like a regular person. Aluminum is actually much better to work with for colors than titanium. The anodization process for aluminum is much easier, much cheaper, and much more like colorful than for titanium. So Apple can actually give us much of more vibrant colors on the Pros, if, of course, they choose to. Apple has historically not liked making Pro devices very colorful, but now at least they could if they wanted to. Riley, it would be boring if all the leaks are true and nothing is left for the live stream. I agree, and that is a warning and an invitation to all of you guys, which is I will, of course, be reacting live to the iPhone 17 event. I do have some nasty shit around that time where people want to inspect my freaking balcony and whatever, so that they want to get some repairs done on the house. But that hopefully shouldn't be happening on the 12th. And even then, I'll still be streaming. I don't fucking care, to be quite honest. So if it gets loud during the stream from the outside, you will know why, believe me. But granted, it's Germany and nobody really likes working after 7 p.m. So I don't actually think that will interfere with the stream. But yeah, also I do expect some changes in general. And I also expect obviously some leaks and rumors that are currently contradictory, right? Like the titanium versus aluminum question to be resolved. So unless Mark Gurman really has a perfect list 2 or 3 days before the event, honestly, I think there will be plenty of exciting stuff to learn about. One thing, for example, is the zoom camera, right? We all know that the telephoto camera is being upgraded to a 48 megapixel sensor. Very likely it's going to be the 48 megapixel sensor that Apple loves using. It's the 1/2.55 inch sensor that they are using currently on the ultra wide in the 16 Pro series, and it's actually the main sensor of the iPhone 16e. So I assume just for logistical reasons they will use this sensor, which is quite a bit larger than the 1/3 inch sensor. Is it over 3 or even 3.2 inches, which is the current 12 megapixel telephoto sensor. But then there are details that we aren't sure about. What about the aperture? Will Apple potentially be able to let in a lot more light onto the sensor? What about variable zoom and or variable aperture capabilities, right? What about changes potentially to the ultra wide? Might we finally get a slightly larger main sensor, like one of these new Sony 1/1.1 inch sensors that are supposedly better than some of the full 1-inch sensors that Chinese manufacturers have been incorporating? So there are plenty of details that I think will be quite exciting to learn about right during the stream. Though, to be honest, Apple might not actually give us all the details during the stream, but it's also going to be exciting learning about it afterwards, whether it's in more detailed press press releases or even like device breakdowns afterwards, or reviews, of course. So yeah, plenty of things to learn about. And even with like the processor, right? Like Apple might make some performance claims, and that will be exciting. And we thus far haven't seen any leaks for like A19 performance, A19 Pro performance. What's going to be like the impact on AI now that some devices come with 12 gigabytes of RAM rather than 8. So a lot of that stuff will also be then found out, of course, in benchmarks and real world testing. And I will be doing some of that myself. And of course, I expect to see a lot of that by people like Geekervan on YouTube, MKBHD, Mr. Who's the Boss, all those familiar faces. So yeah, plenty of content for us to explore down the line. The iPhone 17 Pro is getting thicker, 8.725 inches versus 8.25. So that, of course, comes with the rumor of a larger battery, better cooling for the battery. Supposedly, there will be faster charging. We don't know exactly how fast. Apple might be going with 45, 50 watts for both wired and wireless. We previously got a leak about a MagSafe puck that supports close to 50 watt charging, which of course, if Apple allows you to charge wirelessly at 50 watts, they have absolutely no reason to not allow the same for wire charging, right? And Apple has not been chasing some of the extremely high charge speed of Android devices, especially Chinese devices like 80 watts, 100 watts, even sometimes 120 watts. But to me, 50 watts sounds like a good compromise where they can guarantee a good long-term battery health and still give us a nice experience where in a pinch, you just plug your device in, and hopefully even despite a larger battery, now rumored to be around or even over 5,000 milliampere hours, you still charge it in way less than half an hour, from 20 to 80%, or from 0 to 50%, whatever you need in that moment. So that's going to be exciting. Riley saying, I want to see big numbers, especially for single core performance. I agree. Granted, we might not get quite the same leaps because, well, for this year, we are jumping from N3E as a TSMC node to N3P. So that's not very big. We're also not adding new instruction sets like scalable matrix executions, which is what really helped the M4 generation in certain benchmarks. But I wouldn't be surprised if we actually get single core of 4,000 on the iPhone. We already have that on the high clocked M4 Pro and M4 Max chips, right? So I don't see why the iPhone shouldn't be able to give you that. There's display improvements there. It is a little bit unclear because some of these leaks have not launched have not been talked about by every like major leaker, but supposedly the 16 Pro is getting a new anti-reflective coating for the glass that would help it compete a lot more with the Galaxy S25 and 24s, and upcoming then later, of course, S26 Ultras, which do have a very nice anti-reflective screen that is not a matte screen, right? So it doesn't entirely kill colors like you sometimes expect from anti-reflective solutions. However, I've seen some people speculate about it. It's also not getting the nano-edged glass from things like the Pro Display XDR and now the MacBook Pro. These displays need like very, very careful operations with them. They need even like a special fiber cloth. Well, they don't really need it, but Apple encourages you so you don't actually like destroy that like texture of the screen, because the way it's so anti-reflective is actually because it's on a microscopic level, it's a very uneven surface. It's not something that destroys the image quality for you, but it scatters light into all directions. And because light doesn't come at you now from one direction, the reflections are actually much, much less pronounced. But that being said, that is not going to come to the iPhone, because the iPhone is something you put in your pocket, something that will be scratched by your keys, something that will get wet by the rain and stuff like that, something that you will clean with alcohol and with more rough cloth than just what Apple ships with like nano-edged glass devices. Yeah, if it is less reflective, it is going to be less reflective, but might not be quite as extreme as if you have interacted with a nano-coated screen. So maybe somewhere in the middle. However, that is going to be a big change if it happens. I hope that by the time we are either close to the event, somebody like Mark Gurman comes out and confirms it, or maybe we'll have to learn about it during the event. And hey, I would actually love to be surprised during the event. Maybe Apple comes out with some technical specifications about the screen. And explains to us how they achieved that anti-reflective coating. There might be a brighter screen. So currently the iPhone Max is out at about 2,000 nits of outdoor brightness. We have devices like the Pixel 10 going around to 3,000 nits. So that's something that Apple might want to catch up to. Obviously, a new A series chip, 8 gigs of RAM, and the regular A19 for the iPhone 17. A17 Pro supposedly with a binned GPU down from 6 cores to 5 cores on the 17 Air, and then the fully enabled A19 Pro on the 17 Pro models, all using TSMC's latest 3nm process, in this case N3P, which is about 5 to 10% better being either more powerful or more efficient than the N3E node powering the A18 Pro. People saying we're not expecting a huge jump in performance should also consider architectural leaps. So obviously Apple's relentless focus on AI in recent years should make the neural engine a big a big candidate for improvements that might not scale with the node, but rather just by Apple giving us more neural engine cores or a new neural engine architecture. And the same also goes for the GPU, because the GPU on the A18 Pro is actually pretty much the same as on the A17 Pro. It's clocked higher, it benefits from being on N3E rather than N3B, but it's very similar. There are some RT-related improvements there, but the A19 Pro will be the first time since the A17 Pro that we actually get a new architecture, and that should also bring notable improvements in technologies like ray tracing, which are still relatively new on smartphones in general. Well, to be quite honest, they are still hardware-accelerated RT is relatively new everywhere. We've had it since about the RTX 2000 series on NVIDIA, for example. And then we got it even later on AMD, and obviously consoles took their sweet time incorporating it. So plenty of improvements that we'll see with hardware RT, but also Apple has, of course, their latest generation of Metal. So we'll see how the new architecture helps with certain technologies like Metal FX upscaling, Metal FX based denoising. If the neural engine is much faster, those technologies specifically benefit from better AI performance. That will be very interesting to see broken down. 12 gigs of RAM for the 17 Air, 17 Pro, 17 Pro Max. So whether or not that means that they will just run all the same stuff, but better, or potentially might even get exclusive games, exclusive experiences, and potentially better AI models, right? Because AI models like RAM, and 50% more RAM is a lot, especially if you consider that roughly 2 gigabytes or so are taken up by the operating system anyway, and then maybe a gigabyte or 2 are taken up by some of the apps you have always open. Well, now you go from like about 4 gigabytes of free RAM to about 8 gigabytes of free RAM. So that's actually a much bigger jump than some suspect. So But how Apple will choose to differentiate those products, that remains to be seen. I've already covered stuff like charging. I've already covered a lot about the camera. Haven't mentioned that all devices are expected to come with a new 24 megapixel front camera. There have also been rumors about 8K video. However, 8K video I really don't think has any benefit over highly computationally intense 4K video, right? I think Apple is much better, maybe potentially internally capturing something close to 8K and then kind of downsampling it to 4K rather than actually letting you work with 8K video straight from your smartphone. While the resolution for that is there, and I'm also pretty sure that the computational power is there, there is a question, of course, here with like, for one, the files would be horrendously big, but also, is it actually better than just a higher bitrate 4K video? And that's honestly a decision that Apple, in most cases, knowing Apple, would not leave to the end consumer, but rather just make that decision on an engineering level and not choose to expose 8K until they really think they're ready. Pricing is supposedly $50 higher, which for the 17 Pro model should mean a base 256 gigabyte storage version, which would make actually 256 gigabytes $50 cheaper on the 17 Pro than it was on the 16 Pro. However, then for the 17 Pro Max, it would just be a flat $50 price increase, which, to be honest, given the tariff situation, given the general inflation of the last couple of years, and the inclusion of more expensive features like a vapor chamber heatsink, that actually sounds pretty good to me. I know nobody likes price increases. Believe me, I don't like it either. I'm still wondering if some of the recent strength of the euro is actually going to be reflected in that. For example, the iPhone 15 Pro for me was actually cheaper than the iPhone 14 Pro Max would have been if I had bought it the year before. That was because the euro at that time had a relatively strong position versus the dollar, and now it has it even better than it was before. So now I'm wondering if Apple could potentially lower prices in markets outside of the outside of America. But then again, we do have to consider things like general uncertainty in the world. We do have to consider things that the tariff situation coming from the United States is pretty much unresolved yet. We know that there might be some kind of Supreme Court decision about it because Trump actually lost the case about the tariffs, but they're still being left intact, giving him an opportunity to appeal to the Supreme Court. So I try to not talk as much about politics on this channel, but this is important because this directly impacts the devices we buy. And I know some people will say, well, how does this impact like Apple? Well, for one, they have tremendously high tariff rates on countries like India and China now, but Apple might be exempted from them. But even beyond that, if that brings up prices even up slightly in the United States, Apple might not choose to bring down the full force of the price increase on the US customer, who is a very important customer for Apple, but rather like distribute it all across the world with other strong markets for Apple, like Europe, like Japan, like South Korea, because it might be easier to explain a 5% price increase all over the world than a 10, 15, even potentially 20% price increase in one of Apple's most important markets, which is the United States of America. Yeah, that's about it for the most important part. Obviously, the devil will be in the details. How good are the cameras? Even if there are no that big hardware improvements, how will they be enhanced by stuff like a new image signal processor in the chip? The chip itself, maybe the node jump isn't the biggest, but again, how good is the new cooling? That could actually be a game changer in the overall experience. What about architectural changes to the neural engine, to the GPU? How big will be the impact of 50% more memory? And of course, we know, for example, that the 17 Air is getting Apple's own 5G modem, which is the C1, because that's, according to Apple, currently the most efficient solution they can find. But for example, we know that all iPhone 17 models are getting Apple's own Wi-Fi 7 and whatever generation of Bluetooth, whether it's 5.3, 5.4, or maybe even 6.0 that they will integrate into them. So Apple is going a lot more in-house, and that will be something to really track across the years, because we do have the main chips, the A series, the M series. We do have even co-processors like the R chips in Apple Vision Pro. We of course have Apple's highly efficient chips powering things like AirPods, like the H series of chips. But now we're getting 5G modems in the C series. God knows what Apple will call their chips that handle Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Maybe they'll call it WB series or something like that. So plenty of things to actually be excited about, not just for this device, but just looking into the future, knowing, oh, Apple is actually going very much in-house. So, like, what node are they going to put their own chips on? How will they interact with each other? What's the benefit of using Apple's best-in-class, like, eCores on things like their modems? Because a lot of the power consumption of modems is actually aggregating data. And the more efficient those chips are, the better. Apple might not have the best, like, transceivers or antenna systems because they are not maybe as experienced as Qualcomm or whatever, which is also bullshit. Apple is quite good at that stuff. But then can they make up for that with their own modems? It remains to be seen. Maybe their modems will not be as good as handling highest end speeds, but might they be much better at handling regular speeds of around 200, 300, 400 megabits per second and be much more efficient, much cooler doing that. Benvin is saying, Mark, are you going to buy 17 PM and 18, or do you usually skip a year? I usually skip a year. In fact, when from my iPhone XS Max, I actually skipped 2 generations. I actually jumped from the iPhone XS Max to the 13 Pro Max because the 12 came out, and it was quite an exciting year, especially for the 12 Pro Max, if you remember, because that one actually had a larger, notably better main camera, right? However, I didn't like certain changes about the device. It had a smaller battery, and it got actually like I believe in Europe at the time, it got a little bit more expensive because of all the 5G bullshit. And at the same time, we barely actually had any 5G at that time in Europe. So I decided to wait, knowing that the 13 Pro Max in a year would get even better cameras. That was actually a rumor that was quite in the making for some time. But even more importantly, I knew that it would have ProMotion. And I was extremely happy with my 13 Pro Max. Now, would I skip a year with the 18? Most likely I would, if we weren't talking about the introduction of the iPhone Fold. So I might, God knows, I might actually keep my 17 Pro Max and then get an iPhone 18 Fold, or whatever it's going to be called, an iPhone Ultra. However, if early impressions show that maybe this device is a little bit underwhelming, I might wait at that point. Then I would upgrade to like the 19 Fold. I think. Again, I am quite positive towards foldables if they really get rid of the crease as much as possible. And obviously some design changes to hinges have been quite positive in recent years. The Pixel Pro Fold this year finally has IP68 rating, so that would alleviate some of my durability concerns if Apple did the same thing. While it would lack the telephoto camera that I really like on Apple devices, I think I could live with that given all other benefits it would have. But yeah, it really depends on how good the 18 Fold is. Otherwise, I'm skipping it and waiting for like the 19 Fold or the 19 Pro Max. Yeah, but it also, of course, depends how popular this channel is. If this channel just like explodes and we have 10 times more regular viewers and all of you send me super chats in every video or something like that, then yeah, I might just update all of my Apple devices annually just to give you the best review and impression videos that I can. Yeah, I think I've talked about all the devices basically. Obviously, the 17 Air is a notably different product from the Pro, but yeah, one camera, quite a few compromises. Ironically, maybe titanium on the Air, but not on the Pros. Notably smaller battery. We'll have to see how good it is. I could break down the individual spec points, but then again, I kind of already did while talking about the Pros. So if something new comes up, I'll of course keep covering it in the next few videos. But for now, I think that's enough about the iPhone. Let's talk about the second major product category that might get updated during Apple's September 9th awe-dropping event, and that's the Apple Watch. To be more precise, the most exciting change this year is that we would get an Apple Watch Ultra 3, while Apple obviously did not update the Apple Watch Ultra 2 in 2024. So I myself use the Apple Watch Ultra 2 from 2023. I do not plan on getting an Apple Watch Ultra 3. Quite honestly, I don't think I will be getting an Apple Watch Ultra 4 because I think that my Apple Watch Ultra 2 will be quite fine for it's like a 5 to 6 year purchase for me. I will also be deciding down the line if I actually want to stay on the Ultra train because I've lost a lot of weight starting this year. Overall, I think it's now 40 pounds. And with that, honestly, the Ultra started feeling a lot more heavy for me. So I might downgrade, or at that point side grade, to like a Apple Watch Series 12 or 13. Well, not Series 12, that would be next year, but like a Series 14 or 15 or something like that. Obviously, depending on the hardware, maybe Apple gives the Ultra something so exciting that I won't be able to like not get an Apple Watch Ultra 4 or 5, or maybe they will make a slightly smaller version of the Apple Watch Ultra. But yeah, that's of course highly dependent on what Apple decides to do. iOS 26 already gave us a little bit of a hint of what we should expect with the Apple Watch Ultra, which is a slightly larger screen, 422 by 514 pixels, rather than 410 by 502. That to me makes perfect sense because Apple has slightly bigger bezels on the Ultra than one might expect, so they could easily make the screen 10 pixels larger in every direction without changing the chassis. That makes sense. It would also incorporate a new generation LTPO panel. The Apple Watch Series 10 got LTPO 3. Maybe the Apple Watch Ultra 3 gets LTPO 4 or just LTPO 3, but even better. Part of that is that the Series 10 display is very bright, but then again, the Ultra is very bright too, but that's also because it has better cooling, a larger battery behind it. So Apple could make the Ultra 3 even brighter than the Ultra 2. They can have a very nicely low light mode. So that way, if you're really using your Apple Watch in dark areas with automatic brightness adjustments, you could preserve even more energy, especially for the always on display. And the variable refresh rate of LTPO and the higher efficiency of LTPO 3 allowed the Apple Watch Series 10 to introduce second updates, right? So basically your clock changes every second, kind of like a clock should, but also on the always on display, right? Something that even my Ultra 2 cannot do. And that's definitely a change that Apple will be bringing to the Ultra 3. There will be a new processor. That being said, the S11 chip is supposedly sharing the same architecture and most likely the same 4nm node as the Series 9 as Series 10. So if you're really waiting for a big power change or a new efficiency jump based on the processor on the Apple Watch, wait until something with an S12 chip, which by that point would be most likely based on like the E-cores of the A18 or the A19 chips, and would be based on either N3E nodes or N3P nodes. Which should help it with overall power, efficiency, and of course, there are of course changes to the architecture. For example, the S9 introduced a neural engine for the Apple Watch, and that's of course something that can keep being improved over time as Apple invests more and more effort into their AI stuff. Just in general, all Apple Watches for like the last decade almost, well, at least over half a decade, have kept to 1 gigabytes of memory of RAM. So hopefully that is something that Apple could change. It's funny how Apple jumped to 64 gigabytes of storage on the Apple Watch, but still has kept RAM the same for years and years. So that's something that could change. The other is cellular networking. So that would include 5G based on a new MediaTek modem and satellite connectivity. The latest Pixel Watch that was introduced during the Pixel 10 event also has satellite connectivity, so that would make the new Apple Watch, whether that's the Series 11 and the Apple Watch Ultra 3 or only the Apple Watch Ultra 3, that would make it the second major smartwatch to support this functionality. There's also been some leaks and rumors about potentially including blood pressure monitoring, but this feature has been rumored off and on for years and years, so we quite honestly do not know if that's something that's likely to come this year or be delayed again. Yeah, the Apple Watch Series 10 also uses a metal rear casing with a larger charging coil and an integrated antenna instead of ceramic rear casing, and these changes might come to the Ultra 3. It's very important here to consider that the Ultra does have slightly different design considerations than the regular series, so we don't know if these changes would be implemented on the Ultra and then benefit you with things like faster charging. However, if it is something that is happening, then that's something that would come with these benefits. I know that sounds silly, but I'm always trying to make people understand Apple is working with different materials, with very different sizes, with very different even sometimes priorities. So the Apple Watch Ultra is not simply a larger Apple Watch series. It's not simply even a titanium version of the Apple Watch series. There's a lot more stuff going on in there. So don't expect all changes to just eventually trickle from one device to the other. There are different priorities. That being said, could I see Apple implementing technology that would allow for faster charging on the Apple Watch Ultra? Of course I could, because Apple knows that people like to wear it overnight. So while you might take a shower or whatever, you put the Apple Watch just on your charger for 10-15 minutes, and during that time with a fast charger, you should get most of the battery life that you will need for the coming day, and then the next day you'll just do the same. And if your Ultra is fully charged, that should give you 2 to 3 days very comfortably, even including sleep tracking. So yeah, do I see Apple improving charging speed on the Apple Watch? Of course. Will it happen necessarily this year, specifically on the Ultra 3 and specifically using the same solutions as the Apple Watch Series 10? Maybe. Just trying to be very nuanced here and very truthful with you guys, not trying to jump on every rumor and every speculation completely mindlessly. The other product that is most exciting to me is actually the AirPods Pro 3. Now, part of that for me is actually that I still have the Lightning-based AirPods Pro 2, so it will be very nice to upgrade to a USB-C powered AirPods Pro pair without having to buy basically the exact same AirPods Pro 2 that I already own. So this is now also something that's being corroborated by Bloomberg and some other sources. So seems like it's something pretty definitive. The case will be slightly smaller, and the pairing button will be removed, similar to the AirPods 4. So if you like that small tactile button on the back, well, too bad. That will now be a touch interface in the front. Some people have speculated it could allow for touch gestures on the front. But to be honest, knowing Apple, I think they will still keep it mostly for things like pairing, resetting, and things that you don't do basically all day, every day with your AirPods. For that, you will still have to control them, of course, with the stem, with your iPhone, with your Apple Watch, whatever other Apple product is connected. So, yeah, don't think that will be, of course, the biggest changer. That might be the biggest change, of course, on the outside, because by all other accounts, we are not getting a huge redesign. We should be getting an H3 processor, so next generation Apple headphones chip, and with it, better efficiency, potentially better handling of active noise cancellation, transparency mode, and potentially better speakers in general. Of course, those details are very hard to leak exactly unless Apple was changing from the ground up, like what speaker technology is actually inside AirPods. That's seemingly not the case. They might get like larger drivers, for example, but would they get magnetic planar drivers? I don't know. At least that hasn't yet been rumored. But yeah, to me, AirPods have been some of Apple's greatest devices, especially AirPods Pro 2. I think they're about as perfect as an Apple product can be. To be quite honest, they have good to great battery life. They charge fast from the case, and the case itself charges fast, and the case charges from Apple Watch chargers, from USB-C or Lightning, and from regular Qi 2 chargers. So that's and MagSafe chargers, even including the magnets, of course. So I think the sound quality is great. The ANC is great. I know some people have complained about like degraded ANC over the years. It's not something that I have personally experienced, but maybe my hearing is just not good enough. The transparency mode is still best in class, even after all these years. Don't forget that AirPods Pro 2 are now 3 years old. So if Apple just keeps on making each and every feature inside here 10 to 15 to 20 to 25% better, they keep pricing still affordable. I do think that we could see a price increase. I could see the MSRP going from around $250 to maybe something like $280, which would be like a 12% price increase. Now, this is entirely speculative. This is not based on rumors, but AirPods actually have a pretty steep price drop over time through websites like Amazon. So Apple might want to still have that same price drop, so they could still kind of entice people by like, oh, AirPods are now $100 cheaper, but guess what? Now if AirPods are $100 cheaper, they're not $150 anymore. Now they're $180, right? So again, this is very speculative, and it of course depends on how good the features are. Apple might not even have that much wiggle room to really increase pricing that much if the device is not that much better. But just trying to warn you, there would be good reason for Apple to increase cost here. Next is the crossbody strap, and that is the last hardware rumor I'm covering today, just because I think it's fun. This is, of course, coming from Majin Buu, as I've discussed before. Apple is gearing up to launch a new accessory that promises to blend style and innovation. The crossbody strap, designed primarily for iPhone 17 cases, so that's important. Unlike the AirPods Pro 2, for example, which do have like little openings for lanyard strings, I guess. This will connect to the iPhone 17 case rather than the actual device. This strap offers a unique experience thanks to its design and versatility with other Apple products. According to Majin Buu, the crossbody strap features an innovative magnetic system crafted to integrate seamlessly with iPhone 17 cases. You see the openings here. if you watched my previous coverage of rumors about the 17 cases, the iPhone 17 cases, you know that they actually have lanyard openings on the bottom, on both the left and right, so that should help. And of course, we see all the multitudes of colors that are supposedly being offered. So, a revolutionary design for iPhone 17. An innovative magnetic system integrates seamlessly with iPhone 17 cases. The strap has a flexible metal core that makes it fully magnetic along its entire length. At the ends, rings polarized oppositely to the strap close the system with enhanced strength, ensuring a robust hold. This mechanism allows for intuitive attachment and detachment, eliminating the need for traditional hooks or loops. Obviously, as in the last couple of years, some of Apple's best innovation is basically just high quality implementation of features like magnets. That's not surprising to me, and is perfect for those seeking practicality with iPhone 17 cases. The strap could also be compatible with AirPods Pro 3, as I mentioned, because those also have similar lanyard openings. The display samples of the crossbody straps are made from woven nylon, similar to that used in sport loop bands, a material known for its lightweight and breathable qualities, which is interesting because this really wouldn't need to be breathable. However, it appears Apple will also introduce a silicone variant offering softer touch, greater flexibility. I also assume that would be cheaper, going just by Apple Watch band prices. Both materials ensure durability and a refined aesthetic, ideal for pairing with iPhone 17 cases while maintaining Apple's signature minimalist design. I really hope that the magnets are quite strong though, because you really don't want this to come loose. That could be like a class action lawsuit waiting for Apple. Reliable sources indicate that production of the crossbody strap has already begun, with immediate availability expected for launch. The crossbody strap is designed to enhance iPhone 17 cases, might be compatible with AirPods Pro 3, comes in various styles and a range of appealing colors. In conclusion, the crossbody strap promises to be an essential accessory for iPhone 17 users. I should note, I will not be buying this for personal usage. I might buy it just to own one, just to show it on camera. But honestly, I don't think that this is an accessory for me. I've never worn straps like that go across most of the body. So Apple will not be convincing me to do that here. But that's about it for all the very Apple-y stuff today, because we do have some Google-y stuff right now. And let's actually start with Dave 2D and his camping trip video comparison between the iPhone 16 Pro Max video capabilities and the Pixel 10 Pro XL. Obviously, the iPhone 16 Pro Max is soon going to be replaced, updated through the iPhone 17 Pro. So even if the Pixel 10 Pro wins here, spoiler, it doesn't. That is not really wouldn't be a huge success, because obviously the iPhone is now a year old. But let's actually see how they compare, and then let's see what MKBHD has to say about this product. Guys, we're about an hour into the stream. If you're enjoying this, please consider joining the channel. Subscribe, like, share, comment. Consider becoming a channel member, a Patreon supporter, or consider joining our Discord. The links for that is in the description of this channel. Thank you very much. Benveni, the pixel bezel should be a crime. Yeah, especially like I always thought when I saw the thicker bezel, when people showed like videos, I thought they were talking about the basic Pixel 10. But it turns out that the base Pixel 10 and the Pro also look basically identical. So while the base Pixel 10 still looks somewhat similar to an iPhone 16, the 10 Pro looks so much worse than the 16 Pro. In fact, it looks worse than a 15 Pro. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's basically 14 Pro level. And that's in the year where Apple will be introducing the 17 Pro.
To make a review video on the Pixels this year, because
guys, really let me know what the audio and video quality is for you, because I did have some trouble just making Dave sound loud without making him sound obnoxiously loud. I'm not sure if that's the audio mixing in the video. So I hope I'm not too loud and that Dave is not too loud or too quiet.
busy, and also I booked a camping trip.
So, has trouble focusing on his face, makes his face look gray and ashen a little bit. Now, the iPhone makes him look a little bit too yellow, judging from his regular videos. I know, like, he's Asian, but I don't think that that's his natural skin tone. But yeah, the iPhone has more detail, better dynamic range across the video, much better handling of skin. It's just insane, right? FRKM joining the stream, I believe for the first time in a while, saying all good. So thank you very much for letting me know that you're apparently watching silently along and not chatting, but thank you anyway.
With my family just before this whole launch. But then I thought, you want to make an even better camping trip for my family?
So it loses focus right in the middle of the video. I'm not sure. Like, it doesn't look like he actually moved it. So apparently the autofocus on the front camera is either trash or absent.
If I brought these phones along and made everybody
Again, more focal issues, and the lighting isn't even that bad.
wait for me while I did stuff.
Dave, hurry up!
And
Daddy, hurry up! Come on, we have to go!
So every year at the end of the summer, my wife and I try to bring our kids to some kind of camp.
So this is where, in low light, the Pixel 10 Pro actually seems to have slightly better video capabilities on the selfie camera. Should be noted that it's not like it actually has more detail, but it handles the softer image, in my opinion, better.
Or canoe trip somewhere in the Ontario.
Like, the iPhone is just very noisy. Should be noted, of course, the iPhone 17 Pro is rumored to be getting a larger, high-resolution front-facing camera.
Parks. We load up the car and head
Okay, not too many changes here.
up north.
I mean, yeah, there is a notable difference in like color changes. I would argue the iPhone looks more detailed, but it's not that big of a difference that I would really care. It should be noted that when I talk about video and photo capabilities, I never really use some of the advantages that the iPhone even has that I think a lot of people are actually ignoring. Like, for example, the default 24 megapixel mode, right? It looks way better than the default 12 megapixel on the S25 Ultra, and that's the default mode. And in fact, the iPhone even has, I believe, about the same to even slightly smaller data files for their 24 megapixel mode than Samsung has for their 12 megapixel photos. And then subsequently, when you go to 50 megapixels, the iPhone looks better than the Galaxy's 50 megapixel, which is doing quad binning from 200 megapixels. But then when you compare Samsung's 200 megapixel versus the iPhone's 48 or 50 megapixel, now you could argue, well, in great lighting conditions, it's slightly sharper. And while that gives you some advantage, for example, in like landscape photography, it also comes with severe disadvantages in other areas. Like, it severely impacts like the speed at which the image is taken. So if you are shooting video, for one, that's already garbage, 8K video on Galaxy still looks bad. But even more importantly for stills, of course, that 200 megapixel mode just does like worse processing overall. It feels like a generation or two behind when it comes to the high dynamic range, the computational photography pipeline. So yeah, I try to not bring up certain advantages of the iPhone, even though it does have them, because generally I also like just the default experience of iPhone. And you can even see stuff that clearly is like a little bit darker, while the iPhone tends to brighten up the image, which I know some people don't like, and it makes it look warmer. You will actually see that the contrast on iPhone is actually still higher. So these darker elements, despite the overall image maybe being more vibrant and brighter on the iPhone, as you can see maybe from the girl's face, the iPhone still actually has more contrast, more shadow, and even if you look here down into a little bit of shadow, it also has more detail.
So on a side note, my car is an electric vehicle. It's 8 years old at this point. It's a 2017 Model S. It holds like 80% of the charge it used to when it was new. So at this point, I actually have to charge my car on the way up to campsites now. Battery degradation on EVs is very real. This year, we went to a place called Kilbear.
So you can already see the iPhone handles that contrast better. It maintains the green color. Now, again, you can argue that the iPhone makes it look greener, but like by this point, if you look at the other side of the river, these trees just look gray, right? So clearly, in an attempt to focus on the neutrally grayish tone of the water, the Pixel just made everything gray. I would argue the iPhone also has more detail when you look at far off objects here, but then the sky rendering is just like the contrast of just this being really dark and then this being really bright, while this one just made everything kind of look samey. This is just also a big difference in like default HDR capabilities without even having to go to ProRes, without having to like go into log or something like that. Yeah, big difference.
Provincial Park. I actually brought 4 phones with me. I got the Pixel 10 Pro XL, last year's Pixel 9 Pro, the iPhone 16 Pro Max, as well as Samsung's S25 Ultra. Now, my original plan was to shoot on all 4 of these, but I recognized very quickly that my wife was going to divorce me if I brought all 4. So I only used 2. When we got to the campsite, we pitched tents, prepped some wood, and started a fire. When I started shooting vids, the very first thing that jumped out to me was that the fires look way better on the iPhone 16 Pro Max.
Yeah, I'm not even going to comment on this, right? This is a 3 to 4 generational difference. And you can talk to me about like, oh, the iPhone brightens up the image maybe a little bit too much, makes it look a little bit too warm. This is not a contrast, right? This is green. This is barely green. And some might argue, well, the ground isn't really green. Well, the ground still, if you're familiar with video game rendering, the ground still picks up some of the colors of the surrounding area. And if the surrounding area sees pretty green, well, then the forest ground should not look entirely gray either.
Compared to the Pixel 10 Pro XL. So like the coloring, the dynamic range on the flame.
Yeah, you can see that the main iPhone camera is like noticeably also sharper than the Pixel, especially in like a challenging situation with what I assume is now a 5x. The sharpness is about equal, so I assume that the fact that the iPhone just has a smaller sensor but much better computational capabilities kind of evens out with the Pixel, but then you still retain all the HDR differences here.
It's not an easy shot to capture because the flame is quite bright and it was getting darker, but the iPhone just did a better job at it. Another thing I noticed on the Pixel is that they still have this issue with movement. If you move the camera quickly, you get this weird jarring, like almost judder to the video. It's
almost like you need action mode just for regular video. So basically a deeper crop onto the sensor so you can compensate for some of the stutter and instability.
It's existed on a lot of the previous generation of Pixel devices, and it's still there. I'm surprised that year after year, they still haven't been able to fix this. And it's not as pronounced as it was on the Pixel 9s, but it is still there. Now, in terms of macro video, I found this crazy looking caterpillar crawling around on the cooler.
This is actually something that I'm surprised by how good this looks on the iPhone. Maybe it's really the new 48 megapixel ultra wide, even though it's the exact same sensor size and pretty much the same optics as on the 15 Pro Max. But I've always struggled to capture something like that on my 15 Pro Max. And also, interestingly, I disagree here actually with the conclusion by Dave, which you'll hear now.
Macro mode captures this pretty well. It keeps a lot of it in focus. But the Pixel 10 macro video captures this really well. It just looks cooler to me. It has a very...
It doesn't really look cooler to me, and I don't know why. Like, if he made like an actual argument about like, oh, this actually gets way closer or something like that, I would understand it. But that's really not the case.
Narrow depth of field, so the focus is a lot tighter, and the shot just looks a lot more interesting.
By the way, I really like caterpillars like that, like those that don't look juicy.
Low light videos were weirdly unimpressive on the Pixel 10 Pro XL. Like the iPhone 16 Pro Max looks so much better in this shot. It's kind of crazy. I always thought that Pixel's night.
This is almost now like a 5 generations of smartphones difference in capability.
It was extra good.
And might I remind you, the iPhone here is the 1 year old, 1 year older smartphone in question.
And it works really well for photos, but when it comes to videos, it's actually quite poor. Now, Pixels can do something called Video Boost, where it uploads the video to the cloud for AI processing. This helps
And
with
actually still looks worse in low light. You can actually see noticeably where the bitrate just wasn't enough to maintain detail. It becomes like blocky and artifacty.
image quality a lot, but even with that new Tensor G5
And because it never really captured the underlying data for behind the fire, Video Boost, unless it was really generating a fire just from the ground up, making it totally fake, it just cannot hold up.
this still isn't done on device. I had to wait almost 20 hours for this video to be boosted. All right, so it's the next morning and I've run into a bit of a problem. The one and only battery pack that I brought does not work. It's a big one, but it's older and the USB ports don't work, the AC ports don't work. I do think that I could shoot all the video on these phones with just one charge. That's not an issue. It's just the edit. I have a laptop with one full battery charge. I don't know if I can do this all off of just one laptop battery. We'll see. So in the afternoon, I took a short hike to the lighthouse.
So dramatic HDR differences where the iPhone is able to process the foreground and the background. Now, I'm pretty sure the Pixel will adjust once it gets a little closer, but it's really the automatic nature of the iPhone doing this well versus the Pixel not doing it well, where the image is clearly just way too bright and the sky is completely blown out and even the ground just looks unnaturally vibrant, or well, not even vibrant, because vibrancy also includes color. It's just bright.
Here, it's very
And
cool.
yeah, you see it slowly adjusts, but yeah, that's something that should have happened sooner.
Scenery on the shore of it. The rocks have been eroded to these like very interesting looking slabs. Very nice.
You can see here how the iPhone actually makes it look brighter. I wouldn't even disagree that it might just look a little bit too bright. But for everything else, you also see how there's basically no detail, right, in the tree lines on the other island. The iPhone gives you details for both the rocks in the front and the back and still the sky. So yeah, again, really no competition.
View of the water. Some of the rocks here have this neon orange lichen stuff growing on it. When you take macro photos with the two cameras, you got the same kind of differences as the video. So the Pixel has a very shallow depth of field and you just get more interesting looking shots.
Yeah, here I would actually agree that it looks more interesting. But with this image, I almost would ask, like, what exactly was in focus here, right? Was it really like just here, really? Because that's way too useless without trying to be mean. But like on the iPhone,
has a very shallow...
right? He didn't really focus even on the middle, but on the focal plane, it was clearly focused on some of the moss or whatever it was that's a little bit closer to the camera, right? And that portion is universally in focus, right? While everything that's a little bit deeper into the construct is out of focus. That's depth of field.
Depth of field, and you just get...
And this one just didn't focus really on everything. Everything has like a bokeh.
More interesting looking shots with it, but you do need to be more careful with the focus. There's also a new camera coach feature on the new Pixel phones where if you frame up a shot, you can tap the camera coach button in the top corner and it'll think for a moment, analyze your frame, and then give you some suggestions for like some scenes, and then also give you some guidance as to how to shoot those scenes. It sounds neat, and on paper, I feel like some people might think it might be useful, but here's my experience with it. I am a terrible photographer, like just absolute dog water, but I didn't find it useful. I felt like everything that it would suggest I either knew or just didn't want to bother doing.
Yeah, so like again, AI features. I've complimented Google on a lot of their AI features. I've complimented them historically on a lot of their computational photography pipeline, which does these days also, of course, include AI. These kinds of features, to me, if they're done well, quite honestly, I think the most good thing about that is when they really have a human touch to them. And if the AI was used to recognize certain scenarios and then it just gives you lessons that might have been already kind of like pre-recorded by humans who actually know about photography, then I would say, oh, it's a neat feature, right? This looks way too artificial. So basically, you need AI to recognize what's in the image, and then AI even generates images, right? So it wastes internal resources to create fake photos that aren't happening, to also give you AI-based recommendations on what you could be doing with the photos, right? So not trying to be an asshole, but this is way too inhuman for me, right? Way too transhuman, right? Like I'm just watching Alien Earth currently, and like how humans become like androids or synths, and what does it mean for like the human experience? Are we just because we have our memories? This is the kind of like, obviously this is a lot more complicated and a lot more moralistic. This is just bullshit, pushing AI into every feature. Steve, leaving a membership milestone, a member for 10 months. Thank you very much. Saying maybe make Dave a bit louder. Okay, a little bit. Let me know if it's all good.
I would imagine that most people who actually care about their photos just already know most of the stuff. I just didn't find...
Yeah, the problem also, I told you how the iPhone is worse in low light. Well, I guess I have to retract that too, at least with the selfie camera. But yeah, it's also like, I guess you could make the argument, well, what about kids and stuff like that learning for the first time, right? But I would argue, is that really the best way to learn in comparison to like a YouTube video? Like even, like think about Google's own interest, right? Wouldn't Google be much more interested in, instead of wasting resources on device to generate AI for this, to maybe link you to like some YouTube video and photo capturing tutorials? Not sure if the priorities here between the different Google teams are actually set correctly.
Useful. Also, I've noticed that the two front-facing cameras, because I'm shooting this so late, the pixel is so much worse at just this low-light front-facing video compared to the iPhone. We also saw some deer kind of far away.
So cute.
I put this on 5x telephoto video for both devices. The iPhone just did this better. I was trying to track the deer a little bit because I was so punched in, and
yeah, so this is also a difference where I've always tried to tell that people, like the 5x telephoto on the iPhone, yes, it is combined with a very small sensor and a 12 megapixel rather than a 48, 50, or even 200 megapixel. But people underestimate other parts of the pipeline when it comes especially to zoom photography. One of them is the aperture, how much light is being let onto the sensor. The iPhone telephoto camera has a pretty good aperture, but nothing too game-changing for 5x. But then the stabilization for something that's far away on a small device that's handheld like this is actually crucial. And the iPhone having basically best-in-class sensor shift optical image stabilization on the telephoto is crucial in how the iPhone gives you really good photos, really good videos, even in lower light, sometimes eclipsing the capabilities of sensors that are twice as big with 4 times as many pixels. Steve saying it's all good now, thanks. Well, thank you for letting me know, and thank you for letting me know again.
a small amount of hand movement at this kind of telephoto range would move the frame.
Yeah, you can see its focus is better, the color processing you can also see here where the pixel struggles, it also makes the image actually looks warmer than the iPhone, right? So while some people might tend to say the iPhone just makes everything warm and bright and vibrant in that regard, that's not true. For the iPhone, making everything warm and vibrant, especially in lower lighting scenarios, is actually part of the struggle of computational photography. I'm sure if you ask Apple, they would just prefer to give you a mostly natural image that's slightly more vibrant, right? but that's just not how current limitations of sensor sizes and computational photography works. And in this case, where the Pixel struggles more, it makes the iPhone actually now look cool and more contrasty in comparison, something that we historically associate more with Pixels. Also, don't of course forget that iPhones actually give you a lot of input, especially in stills photography, on how warm and how contrasty you want it to look. And that's not a filter. It's actually you telling the computational photography pipeline what you prefer, just so you know.
Lot, but the iPhone just handled that tracking better, and the image on the iPhone just looked better.
They
It
were
was
so
sharper
cool.
and more
So
clear.
cute.
Now, interestingly, if you take photos or videos of text zoomed in, the pixels are better at it.
Yeah, that's just generative AI, Phil, basically.
And I think it's just because of the AI processing. We saw a snake, took a picture of it, asked Gemini what it was, and I think it identified it correctly as
Visual intelligence integrates with reverse image search on Google and with ChatGPT. So that's also a capability that the iPhone will be able to give you.
non-venomous, but you never know with AI, so
That's correct.
just stay
Never
away from
do.
it. The photo capabilities on the Pixel 10 are quite good, as you'd expect.
Yeah.
Pixels never disappoint when it comes to stills.
I guess the disappointing is more from expectations, right? I remember just the Pixel 4 days where there was like no comparison. Like I would never say that in that at that time, the iPhone had better stills photography. I would argue that in certain scenarios, it matched the Pixel. In a small array, it was superior, but at most of them, it was inferior, especially before the iPhone got a night mode of its own. Now I would argue the iPhone is basically superior in almost every way. I guess some notable exceptions are like the telephoto camera in good lighting conditions and the ultra wide in low light conditions.
The newest feature for the Pixel 10 XL is the 100x ProRes zoom. It's a huge AI model. It's over a gig. This works.
Thanks, Google, for still giving us Pixel 10 devices with 128 gigabytes of storage.
Surprisingly well in a handful of shots out here, but it didn't look great for most attempts. It's
Yeah,
quite
that's also going to be the takeaway by Marquez. And that's also a takeaway that I have about, like, this is, to me, it's pointless because I want my images to look good even in the preview, right? If there was a computational photography pipeline that right while I was taking the image could apply some of this super res zoom, ProRes zoom, whatever, I would be fine with that. But yeah, the way it works and the way it's kicks in after like 30x zoom, yeah, that to me is pointless. And the way it's just completely artificial. This is very much not computational photography, but generative AI. It's a very different process with very, very different results.
Now, because I'm out camping, I'm going to keep this video super short. I spent all of my time with this phone focused on the video capabilities. And I will say, if you're just looking at video, it's not particularly impressive this year. I was hoping...
And it's not even close to the one-year-old iPhone 16 Pro Max.
Expecting it to be really good with camera capabilities this year, just based off of their presentation and their kind of press release. But it's very Pixel-like and not all that different from the previous generation. But
which you kind of expected, jumping from the Tensor G4 and Samsung's 4nm, which was really more comparable to like TSMC's 6nm, to TSMC's N3E. That's like a 2-node jump, at least a 1.5 node generational jump. But apparently Google just didn't put that much new image signal processor capabilities. They just put all of their effort into making the CPU a little bit less sucky and neural engine or the tensor part of it more AI capable. And that to me is a real disappointment.
we'll explore this phone with its full capabilities down the line. All right, hope you guys enjoyed this video.
Well, and now let's see what Marquez has to say about the Pixel 10 devices. Interestingly, this is a review of both the 10 Pro, the 10 and the 10 Pro, not the XL. So it will not have like big comparisons to like the iPhone's battery life. We will look into that in future videos, but since this is a pretty long video, for one, I will speed it up a little, and of course, we cannot make the stream way too long.
All right, I have good news and bad news. Which do you want first? The good news, great, good call. It's still a Pixel. The bad news, it is still a Pixel. See, the Pixel 10 has had some high hopes and some hype behind it for the past couple months. You know, it's the 10th generation. It could be special. The first one with a TSMC chip could be special. Some other things could be revamped alongside Android 16. Like, it was looking really promising to potentially reboot the whole Pixel thing, to finally have it really competing with flagships. Now, instead, it is very much all the things we liked and all the things we disliked about the Pixel already, but the competing with flagships part is coming in the form of a mainstream marketing push, a Jimmy Fallon presentation.
Which mainstream smartphone audience cares about the device being marketed by Jimmy Fallon? Like that's like, I feel like when people in this community say that, I feel like it's us misunderstanding the general audience. It's not that Google has some master plan that we are too enthusiastic about to understand. No, it's Google doing something silly and us trying to interpret something smart into this.
A Jonas Brothers music video. I can't say.
Yeah, I can get that more. But even that is like, how many videos are recorded with iPhones, right? Like even some smaller movies these days. Like how much does that really compare to one video specifically for one event by the Jonas Brothers, if the Jonas Brothers might not even end up using pixels in real life by themselves?
I would have spent the money the exact same way if I was in charge of the Pixel program, but hey, that's why I'm the reviewer.
Yeah, but you're also one of the largest reviewers, one of the most influential, one of the most financially successful reviewers. I'm pretty sure you have a better grasp on how to sell both enthusiast and mainstream phones than Google, which has like, what, a 4% market share in the United States and it's basically non-existent all across the world.
They're the Google executives. So unlike the event.
And even then, what are Google executives are really known for doing? Like Google Search, YouTube, even these days AI, server stuff, I guess. Like, what is their hardware success to really give them the benefit on the doubt on one of the worst events I've ever seen?
Let's just focus on the phones. So this thing is very similar to last year in design, in materials, and in character. Like the camera visor, the glossy glass back with the satin aluminum sides, and vice versa on the Pro phones. Even as an enthusiast about this stuff, you could probably show me a Pixel 9, and unless I knew exactly which one was the new gray color, it could be
almost brownish. That's weird.
Easily mistaken for the new one. And to me, honestly, that's fine. I love this design. The camera bar is nice for holding the phone. It gathers some dust, sure, but you'll probably also have a case on your phone. Great clicky buttons,
which unfortunately
great haptics.
Will make it
all these things are
even
still
more dust.
True about the Pixel.
Like
the bad news, though, is that the things that the
corner
Pixels of the past have been lacking, this one is still lacking. Pixels have never had the biggest numbers or the most bleeding-edge hardware. And these Pixel 10s are still Pixels, so they don't have super fast charging, they don't have a brand new massive silicon carbon battery, they don't have huge new camera sensors or record-breaking displays. My personal biggest annoyance with the Pixel 9 was the optical underscreen fingerprint reader was kind of slow. This Pixel...
he corrected that. The Pixel 9 already had an ultrasonic fingerprint scanner. Apparently it didn't work too well for him. But yeah, these bezels, as Benveni mentioned in the past, they look just horrible.
10 actually does have an ultrasonic fingerprint reader now, and it's faster than Pixel 9, but just a slight beat behind
Which
the
I
other
wonder, like, why just not do it in the power button? It's cheaper. It's a button that's already there. It's less complex for the display. Like if you're like, I don't know. Like I feel like some companies really are trying to just give you a little bit of everything, right? And they're trying to match everyone else. And like this is why I like Apple doing Face ID. Apple was kind of first and kind of game-changing with Touch ID. We've had some consumer fingerprint sensors before the iPhone 5S, but let's be honest, they were never good enough. They didn't have dedicated security hardware behind it, like the Secure Enclave on the A7 chip and things like that. But really, do we need like if you cannot get that fingerprint scanner right, just put it into a position where it's cheaper, easier to implement, and where it works even faster. Riley saying power button fingerprint sucks. Half the time my iPad mini one doesn't work. Well, is that the question? Well, the problem is that well, for me, Touch ID has never worked perfectly. I have pretty large glands. I actually looked at them under the microscope. like do my hands not work too well with fingerprints? Yes. Do they work better with ultrasonic because they create like a 3D image? Yes, they do. So technically, the position doesn't matter. They could implement an ultrasonic fingerprint scanner into the power button too, right? Which at that point, it still wouldn't have to work through pixels and could just come out of the power button. Face ID is the GOAT, I agree.
Like flagships now. But that counts as technically new. So hey, while we're at it, here's everything that's technically new with the Pixel 10s and my take on them. The main new thing is we get a full triple cameras on the base phone. And I'll get more into the quality of those cameras in a minute, so that is a nice inclusion. After that, it's a bunch of subtle things that sort of combine to make it feel a little more flagshipy, but without actually leapfrogging into ultra phone territory. So the fingerprint reader, like I said, is ultrasonic now and slightly faster, and the display that it's built into is a bit brighter too, so it looks better outdoors. The bezels didn't get thinner.
It should be noted, while I know that the iPhone doesn't have an anti-reflective screen, it has always felt better to me than the Pixels. So I've seen once a Pixel 9 Pro at maximum brightness, and that was brighter than what my iPhone 15 Pro Max could do. But I don't know, the reflections and something about the combination, even with the slightly larger bezels, it just made the iPhone still, to me, look more vibrant and more immersive. I know that's a little bit too emotionally driven. I fully admit that the Pixel 9 got brighter than the 16 Pro and 15 Pro, with some caveats in terms of brightness consistency, because if the chip overheats easily, then the display will have to dim down quicker than on other products. And this device still doesn't have the best cooling system, so I wonder how something like even the Pixel Pro 10 XL will maintain something like 3,300 nits, which is what's being advertised now for.
But there's little grills now over the slightly better speakers at the bottom of the phone that are color matched to the metal now.
Yeah, cool. That's nice. That's a nice touch. I always appreciate details like this. This is why you hear me sometimes nag about Samsung and like not even color matching like the camera rings to the chassis. Not even to mention that on certain titanium Galaxy S Ultra products, they don't even have the titanium fully match the glass colors. So clearly some level of effort is being done here that Samsung doesn't do, but it's still not quite to the level that Apple does it.
And the physical SIM card tray is now completely gone. This phone in the US.
So this is something that I hate, because I think it's not a terrible move. I like pushing the industry to eSIMs. Why do I like this? It's because I want the space that is being used for the SIM card to be used for other things, mainly battery, cooling, cameras, whatever you can think of, right? That being said, I do understand that most of the world is not yet ready. Apple has obviously been pushing for eSIM devices for years, and still the only market where the iPhone is eSIM only remains the United States. That is bad, because that means that in the United States, your device comes without a SIM card tray, but with basically empty space in the device. I understand that. However, Apple has a vision here, and it's a vision that hasn't yet panned out. Now, Google is coming along and copying the vision that has not yet borne fruit. And what is Google whom are they appealing to? Are they really just doing this to match something that Apple is doing? Even though they could have an advantage over Apple in the United States by having a regular SIM card. Pixel Performance says, well, I don't think Marquez does like a deep dive Pixel performance test, but if like Geekervan posts like a Tensor G5 analysis, I'll look into that.
US is eSIM only, which I don't like. eSIM support, great. Forcing me to use eSIM, not my favorite thing. Only the carriers win with this. And to be fair, maybe I'm over-indexing this just a little bit because I test a lot of phones. I move my physical SIM card really quickly between lots of phones. It takes like 10 seconds to switch and test something out real quick. So
that's what I like about Marquez sometimes. He will remember that his use case is not regular. I think in the end, most users will greatly benefit from an eSIM-only approach by having that space dedicated to other device features, again, battery, or just making even the device slightly volumetrically smaller. So his use case of switching a SIM card like 20, 30, 40 times a year, that's just not a regular use case.
I don't like this at all, but yeah, eSIM only. The batteries are about 200 milliamp hours larger in these phones across the lineup. That's a nice win. But the internals that are going to make a real difference that people are actually going to care about are Tensor and Pixel Snap. So, all right, we got to talk about this new Tensor chip. Google phones for years have used off-the-shelf chips from Qualcomm, which made sense. They were great. And then the Pixel 6 was the first one to use their in-house designed Tensor chip instead. And the promise of Tensor was never really clear, but the idea was to give Google much more control over these chips and for optimizing for exactly what they want to get out of a Pixel. The thing is, the first Tensor chip wasn't that good. Actually, it was so weak that it had people considering if they should have even left Qualcomm in the first place. But, we got to let them cook for a little bit, right? Let them develop this idea. And so a couple generations in, all of these first few Tensor chips were sort of co-designed with Google and Samsung, and it was heavily based off of an Exynos chip and actually still fabricated by Samsung. So fast forward to today.
And the problem is that it uses very much off-the-shelf like ARM designs for like the main prime cores and the efficiency cores and whatever, but the way you implement them is still a relatively complicated process. And Google's engineers apparently still suck at it because despite using an X4 core, a core that was originally optimized for N4 nodes, right, which is technically just a more refined 5 nanometer node, even now, after taking that core design and putting it on N3E, a second generation 3 nanometer node, they couldn't even like clock it 10% higher. So maybe instead of like 2,200 points in Geekbench or 2,300, it gets you like 2,500 points. It cannot even reach an iPhone 14 with its basic single core performance.
Today, the Pixel 10 is powered by a Tensor G5 chip, the first version of a totally Google-designed Tensor chip on a 3 nanometer process and manufactured straight by TSMC, which seems like the perfect opportunity to make a huge leap in power.
Which is funny because next year they're supposedly jumping to 2 nanometer. But now I'm worried with this clear incompetence behind it, what will they actually be able to deliver even near flagship level performance?
In efficiency, in achieving the original mission of doing their own Tensor chip. And it turns out it's good. It's a really good chip.
It's not. This is where like it's really good. It's just objectively not true. I don't fucking care. Like it's a decent chip because it does what it's kind of supposed to do, but that's a really bare minimum question for a flagship in 2025. Is it good in terms of CPU? No, because it lags behind other flagships by like 2 generations almost. Don't forget, the 8 Elite is about to be upgraded to an 8 Elite 2 or an 8 Elite Gen 5 if the naming actually changes. Don't forget, the A18 is about to be updated to an A19, and this cannot reach the performance of the A16. So no, this is not a really good chip. Neither is it true for the GPU, where in certain benchmarks it will be half of the 8 Elite. And I'm not talking about Geekbench compute because that is clearly buggy. No, and then with their Tensor, with their TPU, their version of Apple's neural engine, it's good. Unfortunately, Marquez does not provide the benchmark for that, even though there is a Geekbench AI app for that. That is unfortunately also something that will still be running in the background, consuming power, making potentially your battery life very inconsistent. So whatever they're doing there, while it might be powerful, is clearly not efficient enough to offset just how demanding certain AI workflows have become. It's a good chip for my grandma, I guess, but like, is this a good device for your grandma then, Riley, given the pricing and the priorities inside it?
But it's not magic. The main complaint that I and other Redditors would have about Tensor chips of the past was that they were simply not flagship level power of CPU and GPU. And this is a $1,000 phone. Like for this price, I could just get
I mean, yeah, and the Pro XL is $1,200, and it's not better, right?
a Galaxy S25 Plus and have a Snapdragon 8 Elite, or an iPhone 16 with an A18. So this new Tensor G5 is more performant than before, but it's not miraculously jumping all the way to the level of the Snapdragon 8 Elites of the world.
Yep.
And I'm starting to think that's not even really one of its goals. Tensor G5 benchmarks.
Yeah, so it underperforms the 8S Gen 4, which is basically an 8 Gen 3. So it's the cheaper version of the 8 Elite. I've seen that single core a little bit higher, but okay. Yeah, 8 Elite around 3,000 points. There's a slight difference if we are talking about the 8 Elite, which is in most devices, or the 8 Elite for Galaxy, which is in the latest Samsung products. So this single core results is about where my iPhone performs, the A17 Pro chip, which of course now will be soon 2 years old. Then you have the abysmal Tensor G4 performance, which just underperforms even like the A14 chips. It's really more like an A12, A13, more like an A13 competitor. Yeah, and now in multi-core, it's basically a mid-range chip like the SH Gen 4. But then again, the gap between flagship and mid-range is actually growing year to year. So that's not really that good. My grandma didn't have a phone. Okay, that's a funny one.
Like a mid-range phone. Like the CPU is about 30% better than last generation, but is a solid amount still behind the Snapdragon chips in Samsung phones. And it's closer to like the...
Yeah, and like that difference in single core performance is just so insulting, because it means that Google took the X4 core, right? Which is one, yeah, admittedly, like, okay, like it's not terrible, but like this is, like they basically had to port it to a 3nm design instead of just taking the X925 core that we've already seen a year ago in products like the MediaTek 9400, and which of course is going to be improved on by processors like the MediaTek 9500 this year.
8S Gen 4, the one in the Nothing Phone 3.
The G4 numbers are like my 10S. Yeah, Jesus Christ. The G4 really was an absolute embarrassment.
And the GPU gap, if my benchmarks are correct...
They are not. So that should be noted. This is clearly Marques not quite respecting the issue of bugs.
are even bigger.
So it's not 6 times slower than the 8 Elite. It's by most accounts, it's half as fast. Could be worse, could be better in some regards. Again, let us listen to what Marques has to say.
For some reason, Geekbench 6 OpenGL scores are literally half of the Pixel 9s and a full like 600% behind the Snapdragon 8 Elite. Jesus. Its strongest area, though, is definitely the TPU, where this one is 60% more powerful than last generation, and that is intentional.
Okay.
This is the tensor processing.
Okay, so I didn't hear, did he mention that it doesn't have hardware accelerated ray tracing? So this is something I'm still not fully informed on. It might just not be supported by games, to be quite honest. It's really sad what happened with like Power VR chips, like GPUs, which Apple had actually utilized before switching to their own in-house design. Yeah, but whatever Google is doing with the GPU on the Pixel 10 really just isn't working. And this is where performance really isn't flagship, and it's not last year's flagship, and it's barely last year's flagship, and that is incredibly disappointing for a product that potentially starts at $1,200.
Unit that's specifically designed to accelerate machine learning and AI-related tasks like running on-device models, editing photos, etc. This is what Google has decided is most important to them with these phones and these chips.
I would love to see a breakdown of the chip and how much of its die area is dedicated to things like the TPU. because yeah, this seems like a very unbalanced processor. Do you think Tensor G6 would be improved a lot, or they're going to do a lazy job year after year? The problem is I don't see how it cannot be much better, right? Because it will be 2 nanometer. It will be at least X925. Hopefully it would be something like X930 or whatever the successor to that core design will be called. And that should give it at least 3,000 points in single core. But at that point, like, at that point, we will be looking at iPhones with 4,000 and even beyond in single core. And with the GPU, the question is, well, what about the GPU architecture? Are they just really buying the cheapest Power VR GPU intellectual property? Because don't forget, the problem with also buying a separate GPU design than going with the off-the-shelf ARM GPUs, which are better, right? Or going with your own solution like Adreno GPUs, like Qualcomm does, that reach actually a mass audience. Now you're actually Google, the company that is responsible for the health of the Android ecosystem, is now injecting a new GPU architecture with very different potentially capabilities from other GPU architectures, forcing fragmentation not only in terms of feature sets, but also just it's a different it's a different company with different intellectual property building this. Now the question is, how good are the drivers? Will developers actually optimize their stuff for this specific GPU, especially if nothing else beyond this 4% market share device in the United States have it? So this is my problem, and this is why I always prefer the direction of Nexus versus the direction of Pixel, which is, I'm fine with Google experimenting a little bit. I'm even fine with Google building their own processors. But at this point, I feel like Google is more confusing the market, confusing developers, and confusing themselves, right? Because they're optimizing these AI workflows for the TPU on the Tensor. But my question is, if the 8 Elite is more efficient, has a better CPU, and a better GPU, how much does it really matter that the TPU is potentially better here if you could potentially just offload some extra capabilities, extra AI needs onto the GPU, which is better on the 8 Elite, on the CPU, which is better than the 8 Elite, on the 8 Elite 2 soon, which will have scalable matrix extensions, it will be way better for certain AI acceleration tasks. Like, what are you really getting? You're spending money on making these chips. You're creating logistical uncertainty for yourselves, because how many chips do we even need and whatever, instead of just buying from a company that produces as many chips as possible. Like, and now you're fragmenting the Android ecosystem. Ben, when he's saying, that's my thing with Google, their architecture is very weak in the chipset. Yeah, and then there the question about the specific implementation. They clearly are not getting the full efficiency that we would associate with a 3 nanometer design, right? So if next year they switch to 2 nanometer, but they don't utilize it as well, potentially because they also like use a 3 nanometer optimized architecture and port it to 2 nanometer, because they still insist on presenting the phone in August rather than waiting until like October, at that point, which they could make sure that it's on the latest ARM core design, or they could even use an off-the-shelf part, which at that point is more likely to be ready, like an 8 Elite or a MediaTek Dimensity, which next year would be like the 9600 or something like that if they don't change the name. Yeah, that's why I'm confused. You clearly are not good at this. And you're not even using, like, if you're not good at this, that's fine. Like, Nintendo is not good at chip designs. You know what they did? They went to NVIDIA and they got the cheapest chip from them that they could in typical Nintendo fashion. So you still got the Nintendo pricing and whatever advantages and the Nintendo optimization by the Nintendo developers. But instead of forcing their engineers to work on something that they clearly aren't good at least not anymore, not since like the Nintendo 64 days, let's instead ask a company that actually knows how to make a GPU. And that's my question with Google. It's like, you clearly worked with Qualcomm in the past. You worked even with different OEMs in the past, everything from Huawei and whatever. Like, clearly you could design such a good product under Nexus, with standard parts, create great drivers, right? Drivers then the rest of the industry could benefit from. And then you sprinkle some Google computational photography magic on top of the cameras. You maybe give some of the AI features to the Pixel a few months in advance. Maybe you give it 1 year free of AI features, while the other devices would have to pay. And now you have a nice baseline product that still actually helps developers in optimizing for the Android ecosystem, and a device that actually tells you, you know what, I'm like a cheaper $800, $900 flagship, similar to OnePlus used to do. If you really want a super high-end flagship with better cooling, even better displays, whatever, pay like $200-$300 extra for a Samsung, or go with a Chinese alternative. But if you really want Google design, Google stuff, here it is. But it doesn't confuse the ecosystem. It doesn't introduce more development needs. And instead, they did all the bad stuff. It's really like, I feel like people don't really like Android the way I like Android, because I really wish Android to be a cleaner, more refined experience. And part of that is, unfortunately, having to cut a little bit of hardware variety to make sure that drivers are better, long-term support is more guaranteed, that performance is a little bit more standardized, right? That was my issue, by the way, with the Snapdragon X Elite and Microsoft, and making freaking, what was it? Copilot Plus exclusive to an ARM processor on an ecosystem that's basically entirely optimized around x86, and for even one specific chip, and then taking months and months to bring the same features to actual processors that people want to buy, like the AMD HX370, for example, or the Intel Arrow Lake APUs, right? That's what I dislike. I dislike confusion more than I dislike bad products. With the iPhone Air, right, I will be able to just tell people, don't buy it. Buy the base model, maybe buy a previous generation Plus if you want good battery life for a lot less money, or simply buy the Pros. But the presence of the Air is not going to confuse Apple in their development efforts. They are working on thinner stuff for the foldables anyway, right? So making the Air, yeah, might consume some man hours, but it's not that huge of an effort for Apple. This is really injecting confusion and instability into the Android ecosystem, at least in my opinion.
To be the fastest and most capable AI devices. So in the real world, performance-wise, this Pixel 10, it is a really smooth phone with everyday tasks. I've been flying around Android 16, multitasking, flying through apps, high refresh rate is always on. Not even really thinking about it too much. It's been very fluid. I will say though, when I went in after a few days into display settings and flipped from high resolution to max resolution, things sharpened up a bit, but the phone also did get...
That's one thing I skipped. Here.
Flipped from high resolution to max resolution. Things sharpen up a bit, but the phone also did get slightly, just barely noticeably slower. Just a few drops. Things sharpen up a bit.
This is 1280 by 2856. This is not the highest resolution ever on a smartphone. This is not the resolution that should be making a smartphone lose some frame rate in 2025. Maybe if your frame rate is 165, and it jumps down to 144, maybe. But this should be easily always 120 FPS in a 120 hertz container. Now it should be noted, I'm fine with variable adjustment for frame rate based on the task at hand, based on your need for battery life. But clearly what he's implying is that it's not happening intelligently, but instead it's happening because of performance reasons. This to me suggests even less about the tensor than you might actually think. This to me suggests more that the device itself is actually unfinished and kind of needed at least another month or so in the oven before actually being released.
But the phone also did get slightly, just barely noticeably slower. Just a few dropped frames here and there, which I didn't expect. And I would also not be shocked at all if you did head-to-head comparisons with graphically intense games and frame rate measurements.
Which, again, Marquez, you really should be doing this yourself as well.
Pixel 10 fall far behind the higher, more powerful.
You cannot just rely on Geekervan to do all of this.
GPU chips.
You have such a large team, such a large studio. Clearly, some of you could learn to use some benchmarks.
Lacks hardware-accelerated ray tracing. That's just not the big strength of this phone. Never has been. And it's still a Pixel, so I'm not expecting it ever will be. What I can say is at least the battery life for my use has been solid. It's been solid. I've been mostly testing the Pixel 10 Pro, not the XL, so even on a...
Should be noted, some people might say, well, the Pro XL has a larger battery. The battery is actually smaller, like the difference between the Pro and the Pro XL is actually relatively small. I'm not sure if it's actually going to give the Pro XL better battery life than the Pro, because the screen is larger and the battery is slightly larger.
Regular size phone, I'm getting all day battery, near dead by the end of the day, but like 6 hours of screen on time and high brightness and all that, so it's been decently efficient. My main concern is now shifting to
Which again, you expect way more from a 3nm chip with under 2400 points in Geekbench single core. That's almost like an efficiency mode, right? Versus like the A18 and the 8 Elite, and especially versus the upcoming A19, 8 Elite 2, 8 Elite Gen 5, whatever, right? It should perform way better than that.
Well, this phone will age, so maybe trying to come back to this in 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, just to see how well this does compared to previous.
Which unfortunately, you don't do that many follow-up videos, Marquez, do you?
Pixels. But for now, the Tensor chip, it's not some miraculous savior that makes it an ultra flagship, but good chip. Good chip. You know what's really good though? Pixel Snap. It sounds silly, but this has genuinely become one of my favorite new features about the Pixel 10s. It's just
I feel like MagSafe has one downside in the name, which is that MagSafe for Mac is called the same as MagSafe for iPhone, but it just brings the point so much better across than Pixel Snap.
Quality of life.
Because ideally, you want to kind of abstract it away from even like the Pixel brand. You want more and more devices to just adopt regular Qi 2.
Life improvement, especially as someone who is a card-carrying member of Team No Case. So these phones have Qi 2 wireless charging now, and it's only at 15 watts or 25 on the XL, but it's so incredibly convenient to just be able to slap the Pixel onto any of my existing MagSafe accessories, navigating with the phone in the dash in the morning, dropping the phone on a wireless charger on my desk where they automatically align, keeping it topped up on a long travel trip with my Ridge power bank. Even if you aren't someone with a bunch of existing MagSafe stuff sitting around, it just opens you up to this massive world of options for magnetic accessories for things you can attach to your phone or things you can attach to your phone.
The bezels, man. Like, look, I know this is the base model, but the Pro is not really better.
Too. And I even think this is actually slightly stronger than MagSafe magnets on the iPhone, at least with the first-party Google accessories they've optimized.
That's not what that means. You should really test out this accessory then with the iPhone, because the magnets might be stronger in the accessory rather than in the phone.
Like with this Pixel Ring stand I got to try. Honestly, this was the perfect addition to this phone. It's like it was already a phone that didn't have very fast wireless charging, and so it still doesn't have very fast wireless charging, but it just gained a ton of functionality. Thumbs up. The two things that always make a Pixel though, well, that would be the cameras and the software. So I have good news and bad news again. Which do you want first? The good news. Classic. The software is still awesome. These phones all ship with Android 16 out the box, all of the fun Material 3 expressive updates, the fun smart wallpaper.
Well, not all. As I said in the beginning of this video, there are still like individual apps that are getting these updates day by day. Because a lot of Google's like obviously apps exist on the Google Play Store rather than being pre-installed.
Out effects, the animations, the haptics, the notification jiggle physics, all this stuff. There's some weird stuff that's not all perfect. Like, I don't love how massive some of the buttons are getting.
Yep.
Like, okay, maybe the alarm app one makes sense, fine.
Yeah, which again is also what Apple is doing for iOS 26. And I do agree that certain buttons should be like designed for like almost like for accessibility use cases. So that's fine.
Make those bigger. But the weather app, like this list of locations has such massive gaps now, so much dead white space between them. Or the phone app.
So this looks so unappealing to me. Also, I hate the random colors. I know you can customize some of them, but I don't understand why I would need to do this. Like, why is this pinkish? Like, what about the search button field here has to be pink? Because look, there are a few colors that I think are somewhat acceptable. It's like UI interface elements. One color, unironically, is not one color, which is kind of like a rainbowish look, right? Which is like very dynamic, changey, whatever. Then there are the non-colors, your blacks and whites and grays, right? Your contrasts rather than colors. And then there's like a little bit of blue here and there, green for like toggles potentially, whatever. But like pink, purple, really vibrant reds, I really don't associate these things with buttons, like especially not with like very neutral buttons like search. I would expect those buttons to be like very specific around like if your app itself is all designed all around the color because maybe that matches the logo or whatever, right? But just in the regular weather app, having gray and white around the actual like where the weather is, and then having randomly this pinkish tone around the search button, that to me makes no sense.
Now, too, they're making these buttons huge. This new Gmail app, these archive buttons are absolutely massive. And look
that doesn't look too bad.
at this stopwatch. Jesus.
Yeah, but again, it's not like this app has that much more functionality.
But, you know, for the most part.
Until you hit the start button, right? Like reset and lab.
I'm loving how colorful and clean and fluid everything has been.
I don't like how colorful it is. That's my least liked portion about it. I also not the hugest fan of the general animation physics behind it. I think some of the snappiness is too much. Like when you look at, for example, how Control Center animates in iOS 26, it's bouncy and it follows basically how you scroll down and then it jiggles. It even stretches a little bit, right? If you go a little bit farther down with your finger, or the bounce, and in the bounce back then becomes a little bit more pronounced. And then it fully calms down. Obviously, this also calms down eventually. But I feel like that jiggle in between, for one, I don't feel it follows your hand movement that much. I feel like it's almost just like a pre-recorded thing. And I feel like the way that certain elements are stuck together, it's hard to explain, but they don't make as much physical sense as the way Apple designs it. It's just like, it feels like Google saw what Apple has been doing for years, which is a very bouncy, rubbery animation, almost like a rubber band, right? But instead of, like, they could have copied this, honestly, and I don't think they would have gotten any backlash. I mean, Google basically copied one-to-one the iPhone 10 multitasking UI because their original one sucked as hell for full-screen devices. They tried to make it half work with, like, still button taps on it and whatever. It really was a complete failure. So I honestly think if they just focused the animation logic of iOS, but still kept to their own design and their own shapes and their own colors and their own icon designs, I think they would have been better off.
And there's so many little things you can tweak and poke around and have fun with. Trust me, just watch a few YouTube tutorials on how to set up the perfect quick settings or have the ultimate all widgets home screen setup. It's awesome, super flexible, you're welcome. And then there's all the AI stuff on top as well, because, you know, Google. And there's a lot of this stuff that sort of just pops up as you start using this phone. And
The reason why I also like to listen to Marquez on these things is because I do like to know what people will think in general. Not to say that Marquez's opinion dictates that of the rest of the market. He doesn't have that much power. But he tends to more align with the broader market than me. So if he tells people that, well, my AI experience was kind of a failure, right? I think that will color a lot of how people see Google's AI efforts, at least the one specifically this year. Obviously, Google does have an image of being ahead of like Apple in AI.
you can choose to engage with it or just kind of ignore it if you're not
Stupid
into
feature.
it. But any one
We
of these
talked about
features
that.
could turn out to be that awesome thing that makes you want to stick with the Pixel, like call screening or now playing. And so the big new one on the Pixel 10s that's got its own section in the settings and everything is called Magic Queue. And this Magic
And
Queue,
that's pretty much the only really interesting one. I should also note that Magic Queue is really just a specific AI solution, a specific UI solution of AI features that really have been promised for years. The idea that your phone will intelligently suggest, especially in like responses, data that's based on your emails, your other messages, even your photos, is really something that Google has been promising for the last 2 to 3 years. Magic Queue is just a specific UI in how it's being handled. And probably, I assume, a specific LLM behind it, but you will listen to how successful it is, which is unfortunately not
it's
very.
a very Google thing that's supposed to take data from across your different apps and services. And
Which
then
this is what personal context is about. This is partially what will be going on with AI Siri in like next March or April. So that's actually something where we'll be able to directly compete and compare those products. And this is a feature that is much better run on device, because you don't want to upload your entire phone's data every time to the cloud, have that analyzed, have that come back. You really want these kinds of processes to run on device. And then we'll see Tensor G5 performance, A19 Pro performance, 16 gigs of RAM versus 12 gigs of RAM. Apple's LLM, on-device LLMs versus Google's on-device LLMs. Apple's UI implementation of that versus Google's UI implementation
surface
of that.
them where you need them. At least that's what it's supposed to do. Now, I was using this phone and trying to get it to work. Like, I was lobbing up perfect situations for it to kick in and read my Gmail or read my calendar and then give me the perfect text to send back. But it rarely seemed to work exactly the way I wanted it to, like it did in my original demos. The thing it did the most often was it just kept giving me a link back to like open my calendar and check for the information myself, which is still kind of helpful, but only half as helpful as advertised. I have all the settings turned on, so it's supposed to be able to look into any of these apps, screenshots, email, messages, also Keep and Contact.
Ideally, you would also really want third-party support for that. A little bit of problem with that, unfortunately, is because Google constantly changes their AI priorities. It really becomes difficult, at least from what I've heard, for third-party developers to really fully buy into this. Like, hopefully they stick to like Magic Queue in this specific feature, and they just improve the LLM, the algorithms behind it, and then more and more third-party developers will feed it, more data in it, more stuff to cross-reference, resulting in even better LLMs down the line. We'll have to see.
And Calendar to return the answer to the question pulled from inside the app. A few times I did actually get that to work for me, but sometimes it was wrong. Like, I have Andrew asking me for my flight info next week, but it's giving me the info to the flight I have this week. And that would be fine if I could go edit it before I send it, but if I click it, it just sends the whole thing automatically. Yeah. And doesn't also include some of the information I would think you want, like the flight.
It should also really be customizable, right? Not just with the edit, but also what if you do have, like, this actually got it wrong, right? And it sent data about a flight from this week, so it actually misunderstood it. But what if you had several flights next week? What if you had a flight to one direction and then a flight back next week? Which flight is now the one in question. Technically, with a lot of context, the AI could guess it, but why leave it to a guess if the AI could present you a nice UI that tells, oh, here are 3 upcoming flights that you have. One is from this week. Maybe the person actually got it wrong, right? They didn't know which day it was specifically. And here are 2 flights from next week. Which one would you actually like to share data with? And how much data would you actually like to share? Would you potentially like a screenshot of the actual boarding pass or something like that? And he will go on about that as well. But like, this is why my problem is, I think AI will never be truly good for these tasks unless it's built really specifically. And this is where I think that some of Google's stuff feels like it's just the most basic. AI is kind of teaching itself things rather than here is AI learning from your data, but the UI, the user interface, the user experience around that artificial intelligence is actually curated. Here's a specific UI for calendar entries. Here's a specific UI for something like flight data or train data or for music, photos, and videos, right? Sure, we cannot do it for every kind of data, but certainly for your most used kind of data. And the fact that this is the result from this, just one time, and which, by the way, might even create questions about stuff like time zones and whatever, especially with flights, and your the date where it's happening, that just looks lazy. Where is the number of your flight? Where is the potential to even write from which airport to which airport you're going? Potential corrections for time zones. All of that must be here, and it must be automatic, or at that point, it's just easier for me to go into my email, take a screenshot, and go back to my message.
Number. I can see the promise here. It's just, it feels like it's still a work in progress. The other thing, though, that I found pretty interesting was conversational editing. It actually is coming to all phones with Google Photos, so it's not just like a specific Pixel thing, so I won't spend too much time on it, but it's potentially a game changer because it's semantic photo editing.
This one has nothing to do with on-device computational. There's just not enough computational power in the device. It would either take too long, it would cause your device to overheat, it would consistently degrade your battery. This is a feature I'm actually inclined to test. Maybe I'll be so smitten by it that I'll actually subscribe to Google One for a little while.
Editing from text prompts, so it understands what you're asking for and then does the editing for you. From simple stuff like, brighten up the faces, or remove the road sign, or even just make this picture better, which usually does like a nice crop and centers it around the subject and evens out the exposure, but all the way up to complicated stuff too. Like
the make it better really is where I deem AI still not good enough, like semantically, to understand it. I mean, Apple has like a general enhance button that I would prefer in that regard. But yeah, for obviously it does a lot more. My bigger question with this, I believe it's either inside Google Photos or it's like, I'm not even sure if there was discussion about it being a separate app. My question is, Google has an actual photo editing app called Snapseed. Why isn't this feature integrated into that? And with that, instead of just using generative AI, it would actually make those changes based on capabilities of the Photos app, right? Of this photo editing app. Kind of like what Photoshop does a lot. This is my problem with Google's insistent on just making general AI, right? By which I don't mean general AI, which is like the gold standard of AI, but I mean just like the most broad AI, not apps, not super app specific, not a dedicated user interface or anything else like that. Just like some suggestions and the star icon doing its circles. Why is Google doing that rather than implementing it in actual apps that they already have?
Add a hot air balloon to the sky. It'll do that. Or delete the cars and make the sky bluer. And then it does it. It just does a surprisingly good job just from hearing what you said. Google, genuine question. Is video editing next? Is that even possible?
It is possible, but it is a lot more computational impact.
Should I be concerned?
No, because the quality is not there and it will be way, way more difficult with video. And I'm pretty sure it will be pretty costly to do it with well with video.
Excited? I don't know. We'll see. There's a couple other things like the journal app. And
Which is somehow Pixel 10 exclusive because that somehow makes sense.
Notebook LM, which are both pre-installed on these phones. Also, Daily Briefs was next to useless for me. Like, it's supposed to be tailored to me and relevant to my day, but yeah, that's not real.
All of these super general, like, look at your day shit never works. The problem is that our days are usually either too boring, which means that we just go through our routine, which means we don't really need any kind of AI suggestions. And even when it comes to news, we kind of prefer the sources we know and love rather than like whatever Google is going to put in here. And then like check out these videos and music. That's really like Google does not know with which mood you woke up that day, right? And preferably doesn't know what you maybe have discussed on like a phone call with your family and friends, right? So it might not know what you're interested in, and that's better that way, believe me. But then my question is, everybody still does it. I mean, we've had it way back, even like with the HTC phones, right? And then Samsung does like an AI overview of your day, which mostly ends up just being your calendars, your reminders, and whatever. My question here is, could Google really not actually put effort into making this work with your YouTube stuff, with your Google Music stuff, and not just in the broadest prediction sense, but here just like your latest subscriptions, whatever. But I guess that would take, because look at what the UI of this looks like, right?
To me and
it's
irrelevant
just lazy
to my
lists.
day, but
instead of actually saying we are Google, we actually have UI prowess, we actually have dozens, hundreds, thousands of engineers. So how about we actually build like a mini version of YouTube in here, a mini version of Google Play and Google Music? But that's not happening. It's just lists and lists of boring SAI implementations.
Yeah, that's not really a ton of useful information here. But overall, like I said, the software is really good. And if there's anything that pops up that you don't like, you can literally just ignore it. So that is...
Yeah, but that's kind of the point. Why would I then even go into these kinds of solutions if there is enough there to bother me in the first case?
Good news. So then the bad news, the cameras. And this is where it kind of gets a little bit weird. It's not like they're bad cameras. But the bad news is that it does feel like the cameras are slipping a little bit. The Pixel has leaned heavily on elite software processing for years. They, surprise, never really had the biggest sensors or the best hardware, but they pioneered HDR+, and the Pixel camera always had this sort of confident, contrasty look.
Which Apple was forced to like go after that, right? HDR Plus came out way before the iPhone XS. The iPhone XS had to introduce Smart HDR. Night Sight, I believe it's called on the Pixel, right? Resulted in the iPhone 11 having to introduce night mode photography. And those were the days when Google actually used their computational prowess to push new features in here that weren't simply AI. They were actually better photos because of AI and algorithms. And funnily enough, a lot of that came actually before the shift to custom hardware. So clearly using Qualcomm chips and whatever wasn't the bottleneck they claimed it was.
To it. This generation of phones, it still has that look, but objectively speaking, like these cameras, they just don't stand out from the pack nearly as much anymore, and in some ways are kind of falling behind a bit now. Triple cameras, like I said, are awesome to have on the base phone. So that 48 megapixel main camera.
So this is a downgrade from the Pixel 9, which actually was a full 1/1.3 inch sensor. So the same size as the primary camera now in the Pros, and almost the same size as the iPhone main sensor, about the same size as the Galaxy S Ultra main sensor. Now it's a significant downgrade to the point where this is actually worse than on the base iPhone, which has a 1/1.56 inch sensor.
The ultra wide and the telephoto is a 5.
Also a downgrade was, I believe, a 1/2.55-inch sensor, about the same size as the ultra wide on the iPhone. Whether we're talking the 12 megapixel or the 48 doesn't actually make too much difference. They're about the same size. And now the telephoto is there, which it wasn't before. But really with this size, with not even full 12 megapixels, not the best image stabilization, not quite the computational power that Apple has these days, not quite the same optical capabilities that Samsung even gives you, much less like when you look at some of the telephoto cameras on Chinese flagships, which can sometimes be available for like close to $900. You get like 1/1.4-inch 200 megapixel sensors.
And then the Pros have a bigger 50 megapixel main camera, a bigger, higher resolution ultra wide, and a bigger, higher resolution.
So these sensors to me are all perfectly acceptable. In fact, the telephoto in terms of sensor size is actually better than the 15 Pro Max or the 16 Pro Max. This will make it better in good lighting conditions, but again, the worse stabilization will make it worse in night scenarios. That being said, obviously the computational pipeline is just not getting improved enough to make these sensors, these optical solutions stand out versus the competition. Even the upcoming Galaxy S26 Ultra, which will have a 1/1.3-inch sensor, most likely. There are some rumors it might get a larger sensor, but it will also get a much larger aperture, up from an f1.7 aperture to an f1.4 aperture, which could lead in like 30-40% more light onto the sensor.
5x telephoto as well. So regular wide shots from the Pixel 10 and 10 Pro, they look great. You know, sure, the sensor's a little smaller on the base one, but they both do a great job with sharpness and dynamic range and lots of detail, and usually pretty great color too. They have that look. Night sight is still elite, but past that,
it really isn't. I mean, it's elite together with the iPhone, I guess. It's still better, a lot better than a lot of the Chinese competition, I would argue, and still a tiny bit better than Samsung, but it's not what it used to be, where it was really elite and even like a completely unique.
It's just not good at any type of zoom like I was hoping it would
Yeah.
be. The ultra wide is okay, but usually pretty soft around.
The problem is what Google is doing is kind of, and this is a very nerdy comparison, but it's kind of what happened with anti-aliasing, especially temporal anti-aliasing before the introduction of better AI-based solutions like DLSS and now FSR4 and PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution, is that we got very high resolutions in video games, but ironically enough, to make them look realistic, we kind of had to soften them with anti-aliasing to make the edges of those pixels look less sharp. Because to make it truly sharp without anti-aliasing, we would kind of need like 8K, 16K, but that's just a computational waste. Instead, we would use low resolutions like 1440p or 4K, and then just soften out those edges a little bit to create smooth but not overly sharp lines. And I feel like that's what kind of happening with Google. Even though the sensor is good, it's a decent size and has a good resolution, because of all the computation happening on top of it, and the fact that it doesn't even have a higher default mode like the iPhone's 24 megapixel. Yes, you can force it into full resolution, but it's not really the same. It's now a softer image.
The edges with a bit more chromatic aberration than I'm used to seeing. And then trying to zoom in was like just surprisingly bad, at least compared to other flagships with decent zoom. Almost every photo I've taken, even on these Pros that's zoomed in, is just soft. Like colors would be fine and it's bright enough and it's not a terrible image. Mission still accomplished, I guess. But like this super res zoom feature on the Pros that kicks in for everything past 30x really feels like it encourages me to take a bunch of zoom photos, because once I do, it'll run it through the processing and sharpen things up and resolve detail out of thin air with a little machine learning. But yeah, the results just weren't that great. I didn't even go all the way to 100x. All the pictures I'm taking are like 30 to 50x, and they kind of look like they have a cartoon filter over them, even compared to a pretty mediocre zoom like the iPhone 16 Pro. And it gets absolutely smoked by a good zoom like the S20.
Which again, there's also a lot of artificial processing over here. But yeah, in good lighting conditions, the iPhone zoom is not that great, which is interesting because I remember the Pixel 9 actually having a better default zoom in good lighting still than the 15 Pro. So apparently the 16 Pro improved its zoom without actually a higher resolution zoom camera more than the jump from Pixel 9 to Pixel 10.
25 Ultra,
That's
even
very
though that's more
interesting.
expensive. Maybe I shouldn't be complaining about 50x zoom photos. Maybe nobody cares. But the sweet spot for zoom is definitely like 5 to 10x.
No, the problem is that's the sweet spot for this device, but actually the sweet spot, in my opinion, is more between 3.5x to like 7, 8x.
A little past that, maybe. And then the wide photos are still obviously really good. It's just the gaps in zoom performance are a little weird considering how much it seems to encourage me to take zoom photos. And then there's video performance, which is still also beat behind the flagships. If you want to see samples, I'm planning on shooting the next autofocus video on the Lucid Gravity on this phone. So if you care about either Pixel 10 Pro video.
I don't know if you can see it, but there's notable little like blocking and artifacting here. I don't know what that's based on. I don't know if this wasn't a very bright day, but this is one of the worst previews I've seen for like an autofocus video by Marquez.
Or the newest, very impressive Lucid SUV. Yet subscribe.
I guess those are also the little stutters, right? They make it look visibly less sharp because that little jitter kind of makes you lose focus.
Over there. I'll drop a link below the like button. But yeah.
It's very small and it's very, you could argue, nitpicky. But again, these are also the cameras that are on their $1,200 Pro XL.
All the A-roll shots and then the B-roll will still be from the iPhone. So
and I guarantee you that my 15 Pro Max is better in every way.
So the Pixel 10, it's still a Pixel. It feels like the Pixel is a finished / complete thought. For now, just
I
based
agree.
on the way Google's acting and working around this phone.
Kind of
and
is the
they're not making any
example
big philosophical
that, right?
changes to the way they attack.
They could have
making
done
a
way
Google
more
phone.
with 3 nanometers.
They're just trying again to take it to the masses. So if you didn't like the Pixel last year for certain reasons, like, oh, it's not the best hardware or it's not the most powerful,
as much on efficiency
then you still won't like the Pixel. But if you love the Pixel of previous years because, it's this cool design that you like, or it's got great stills or awesome software, then you'll love this Pixel too. Google's path of trying to bring the Pixel to the masses is definitely challenging. Maybe they really believe in Jimmy Fallon and the other celebrity endorsements that will be their savior and finally make it happen. Me personally, I think the other half of their strategy of like directly addressing the masses that are on iPhones here and giving them reasons to switch.
I disagree. I know that some iPhone users are switching or getting a Pixel as like a secondary product, especially if you need like a business phone or whatever. I honestly think that Pixels have a way better chance of of just eating a little bit into other Android manufacturers' market share, especially outside of the United States, where we actually get a big problem with like clean UI and stuff like that, where Samsung is like the only option. And then when you choose a Chinese product that might have better value, the issue is you really get a UI that potentially might even have like bad translations, especially in a country like Germany or France, right? Because in English, the translations are generally okay, maybe not great, but then with other languages, it really starts to struggle. And this is exactly where Google, as more of a Western company, could come in and make a phone that's more polished and a solid competition to Samsung in markets like Germany or France and Italy and Poland and Spain. But they don't. And that's my problem.
With like Pixel Snap and other directly competitive parallel features, I think that is far more interesting. And I did just make an entire video about this, so I'll link this below if you haven't seen that yet. But the Pixel still being a Pixel, to me, is mostly good news. I really like the Pixel. I'm probably going to switch to this Moonstone Pixel 10 Pro as my main daily driver phone.
You won't. Why? You always use XL devices. Why would you use this just because you've gotten it? Just wait until you get an XL. Also, that's not your daily driver. You're using an Apple Watch Ultra. Stop saying the iPhone is not your daily driver. Also, you're saying often that you're like really like the Pixel Fold UI It's like really like your dream productivity UI for like small devices. Why wouldn't then the Pixel 10 Pro Fold not be your Android daily driver, while your iPhone remains like your daily driver for things like AirPods and Apple Watch compatibility?
And then I'm probably going to switch off of it to something with more tempting, interesting hardware features. And then I'll probably switch back when I get bored with the other weird software experiences and I want this feeling again.
Well, wait, but by that logic, the Fold should be your number one device. The Pro Fold, I mean, the 10 Pro Fold, the Pixel 10 Pro Fold, not the Galaxy.
And then I'll probably switch off of it again when it starts aging poorly. I don't really know. The Pixel is right where it's always been.
Yeah, but that's the problem. You can, like, this is not a recommendation for regular users. If you're telling them you might make them your secondary daily driver, only then to switch basically immediately, that's not really a buying recommendation. I'm sorry. It's not a bad video, it's just a weird conclusion. It's like a weird, like, it's when he calls the Tensor G5 a good chip, I will be like, okay, I can kind of accept that. But then he's like, oh, really good chip. And I'm like, no. Those are noticeably different words. They do noticeably different things to like a recommendation. If you call something good or really good, and in the best case, you really should be calling it decent and really underwhelming by flagship standards. That's kind of what you should be calling it. You can call it decent because it does what's asked of it, but really just objectively, it does not deliver flagship level performance, not even close, in fact. And in fact, if you tested some games, I'm sure you would have far harsher words towards it than good, really good. Let me see if everything is working all right. I actually haven't checked my streaming quality for a bit. Because we would be transitioning slowly to my last topic of the day, some more chip yapping for Riley, and that is the Exynos 2600 chip. This is another leak, as often happens in the Samsung world, by Ice Universe on Twitter, or the account is known as Phone Art. And this is a second benchmark that we got for the 2600. Obviously, as chips get tested weeks, months before they're released, they're not always tested at full power. They're tested in weird reference devices that might actually reflect the heat and battery capabilities of the final product. You might also just test them for stability in different clock speeds. So previously we got a result that was really underwhelming, but that really was clearly an early result, which was 2155 single core and 7788 multi-core. Riley saying, finally, the snooze Pixel Fest is over. It's chip time. It is chip time, Riley. And in fact, it's pretty exciting chip time, because we are in fact getting pretty high results here of 3,300 points in single core, 3309 to be exact. Should also note that this is Geekbench 6.4, so the chip should have all the enhancements in results that you would get by including things like scalable matrix executions too. And it gets over 11,000 points in multi-core, 11,256. That's a nice result. All of that is quite competitive with around the 3,400 and 11,500-ish results that we've seen for the Snapdragon 8 Elite 2 for Galaxy, or as it might instead be called, Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 for Galaxy. Also notably, this is running at 3.8 gigahertz, which would give it an exceptionally good instructions per clock value. Should of course be noting that these reference cores, which usually Exynos uses the same main CPU architecture as the Dimensity chips from MediaTek. So in this case, it would be like the again, we don't know what the successor to the X925 is officially called. If I had missed those news somehow, please let me know. I've seen it referred to as the X930. That's what I call it until I get like an official confirmation. So this running at 3.8 gigahertz actually to me looks really realistic. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if those were basically final results. They make a lot of sense given the scaling that we expect to see. When we actually look at the Dimensity 9400 on Geekbench, right? So that would be the predecessor in terms of at least the main core, right? Now, again, Geekbench tends to advertise like slightly lower scores than some of the top ends that we see. Usually this would be more at 2950 or so. And then the Dimensity 9400 would be more of a 2800-ish result, maybe 2750 or so. So, and when we look at the Dimensity 9400 in terms of clock speeds, they only show the base frequency of the E-cores. Do they really not have the full clock speed? It's around 3.6 gigahertz, right? The 9400 clock speed. Yeah, it's 3.62. Given that we are only going from, at least with the official design, from N3 to N3P, and here we are going with Samsung's 2-nanometer design. 3.8, maybe they could push it up to 3.9 or even 4 gigahertz. Don't forget the Dimensity 9400 is a higher clock variant of the Dimensity 9400 that gives you about 100 megahertz more. So that could happen. And if we look at these results being 3800 or so, I would argue that it just makes sense for the result. Okay, the reloading was a little bit slow. That it just makes sense that with a little bit higher IPC and slightly higher clock speeds, these results scale well. Now, could it mean that we'll get further benefits of things like ARMv9? I'm not sure. This is still internally called ARMv8, even though it's 100% based on ARMv9 architecture. So could there still be improvements for this benchmark? I know a lot of people have talked about previously how the 8 Elite Gen 5 and the Dimensity 9500 are all promising 4,000 points in single core. I don't know why this is a common belief. We have not yet seen any benchmarks really to corroborate that. But if they do, that would definitely leave the Exynos 2600 much more closer to a mid-range solution. But this is about 10% higher than the current 8 Elite, even the higher clocked 8 Elite for Galaxy. It would also represent dramatically higher IPC. So depending how it's done, it could be a lot more energy efficient. Of course, that would also somewhat depend on how good the node is. And with it also is the question of efficiency and the question of sustained performance, but that will of course depend on the specific implementation. There are rumors that Samsung is also trying to make Exynos work outside of their own products. Previously, we've had Samsung sell some of their chips to other manufacturers, but over time, MediaTek kind of took over that market, that Qualcomm market, basically. So it will be interesting to see if this stays a Samsung-only solution or might actually be implemented by other manufacturers. Yeah, but that's about it right now for the Exynos 2600. Previously, we've seen it actually perform pretty well in Steel Nomad Lite. Here was actually about 15% higher than a regular Snapdragon 8 Elite device. So would that necessarily give it competitive capabilities to an 8 Elite 2? Probably not. There's a rumored 30 to 40% improvement happening over there. But then again, a lot of that really comes down to the question, what about sustained performance? Because when you actually look here at... ooh, really? Well, I guess that might not matter that much in the end, but Samsung getting its chip licenses revoked in China is definitely not good. SK Hynix as well. let's see, but let's get to what I wanted to say, which is, that's not the full story. Which is when you look actually at the sustained performance for the Tensor G5, the funny thing is, okay, look, in multi-core, under 6,500 points, really not great, because you see that's, I have no, okay, this is the Razer, so it has a really underclocked 8 Elite, I assume, but then every other device is like over 9,000, the A18 Pro is over 8,500, and that one is actually also like much less power consumptive than the 8 Elite. And then of course in single core, we have it competing more with what would be the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, for example, in that regard. So a 2-year-old chip at this point with Antutu, not great. And you see about half the performance in GPU. Again, you guys know I'm not a huge fan of 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme because there are newer tests here, but hey, right? At least it's higher than the Pixel 9 Pro, which is not what Marquez showed you, where it was half as, almost 1/3 as performant as the Pixel 9 Pro. So just trying to give you a little bit more nuance and detail that might have been missed. But what's interesting here is that actually, when you look at that Wildlife Extreme stress test, instead of the usual smartphone stuff, flagship stuff, of maintaining around 60%, it maintains close to 90% of its maximum. Now that is still way lower than the sustained performance of the 8 Elite, but it now makes it a much smaller difference, right? Rather than being a 2x difference, which is what we saw with the best loop score, the difference is now more like 40, 50% or something like that. And that also will vary, of course, based on the specific device. So clearly, the 8 Elite is a very interesting and even exciting product, both in a vacuum and in specific implementations, but it really, really in the end comes down to specific implementations. How big is your vapor chamber? And even if you can cool it, what's your battery life once you're consuming 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 watts, 15 watts, if you will be going by GeekerVan data, which again, I don't, but just trying to make the point. But then apparently in raw CPU results, the stability was not actually that great. But I do care about that much less. Because I do think there are better benchmarks than what GSM Arena is using for that. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the exact numbers in the full GSM Arena reviews. For example, you guys know I always like to bring up their brightness data and how that's actually a huge boom to the Pixel 9 series. When you look, for example, at the display brightness here, right, you actually get the 2400 results, which are actually nicely higher than the iPhone, which are a lot higher than around the 1500 results of like the S25 Ultra. Sure, again, the S25 Ultra does have that nice anti-reflective coating, but that does not help too much in for like HDR and everything. So this also device does suffer from weird issues with PWM. But yeah, the reason why I'm showing this is because I am curious to see the final results that GSM Arena will provide for this, but also, of course, for battery life, right? So the Pixels are not the greatest performers when it comes to battery life. Definitely not bad, but you usually expect more for the battery capacity. I would argue the Pro XL is also always a good example of like, yeah, it does have larger battery than the smaller versions and whatever, but it really does not even have that much more battery capacity because, of course, so much space is being taken up by other components. Yeah, all of this is fascinating. And obviously, we will cover here in detail the performance of like the A19 Pro once I have that in my hand. Obviously, I will contrast that with benchmarks that I get for 8 Elite 2 devices down the line, Dimensity 9400, and then Dimensity 9500 results down the line. And yes, now I'm also more excited about the Exynos 2600, which if you want to see the latest 8 Elite Gen 5 stuff, or okay, they don't let me look actually for articles. So 8 Elite 2 benchmark. Seems like 8 Elite Gen 5 is still not fully accepted in the rumor sphere as like the go-to name. But I do think that there's actually a potential for it to be called that. 33 or 9. Oh, that's the exact same result as the Exynos 2600. But yeah, we did also get a result that's supposedly for the 8 Elite 2 for Galaxy, which is around 3400 points. But that was also with lower clock speeds than this device. But I also believe they were tested on different versions, because this one is on Geekbench 6.3 and that one was on Geekbench 6.4. So we are waiting for new data. I know, Riley, you would love me to keep yapping, but I do need, first of all, I do need all the tests happening on Geekbench 6.4. I also need them to happen closer to the actual finalized clock speed. And ultimately, I would like to actually see those devices perform in the real world, where we will also see the chip's impact on heat, cooling, battery life, all that stuff, sustained performance. So because I was previously shitting a lot in the Tensor G5, I felt at least the need to show you that at least with sustained performance, it does some interesting things by giving you 90% of its GPU performance in terms of sustained performance. Yeah, but obviously I'm much more excited about things like the Exynos 2600, the 8 Elite 2, the Dimensity 9500 than I am about whatever Google is doing with Tensor. Riley, you like to see big clock speeds. Sure you wanted to put the L in there in clocks? Sorry. My brain is becoming mush, so I'm making stupider and stupider jokes. Let's see if there's any leaks and rumors from today that I've missed. Not on 9 to 5 Mac. Not on Mac rumors. As I promised you guys, today is a beefier stream at about almost 3 hours now. So before we wrap this up, I would like to encourage you to do all the YouTube jazz, as we call it around here. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so. Like the video, share it out with anybody who you think might enjoy it. Comment. Don't just comment in the live stream. Please comment live. In fact, Riley, just for your amusement, you are getting big mark as I'm wrapping up. You're getting big mark with big clock speeds. Whenever you catch me live, consider leaving a super chat or a super sticker. That helps tremendously, gets reinvested right in the channel, helps keep my motivation up, of course. You can become a channel member right here. Shout out to our MarkTech Pro Max members, Angelica, Max, Maximus, Steve, and Jonathan. And of course, you can also become a supporter over on Patreon. Shout out to our MarkTech Pro Max supporter over there, who is Ben Veni. And of course, join our Discord. The link for that is in the description of this channel. Our Discord is very lively. Riley keeps on yapping there nonstop, or he comments when I yap, which is like, that's kind of my Discord. It's kind of my right, Riley, just saying. But yeah, join us over there. Enjoy the discussions we have. And then, of course, as we get closer to the iPhone event, I'll try to give you last-minute summaries once Mark Gurman posts something, or Minchi Kuo or whatever. But also, beyond all that, I will try to well, I won't try to, but I will react live to the iPhone 17 event. And after that, of course, I will give you, I'll watch reviews with you. I'll watch camera comparisons with you. The Discord is so quiet those days. Well, the Discord is a little bit quiet because we are not around an official release date. I remember the days when we had 150 live viewers, right? When like the M4 Max were introduced, right? And I admit that Discord is entirely my fault. I should have opened it way sooner. So, guys, if you find other people on Twitter or other social media, I don't do this enough myself, so I really rely on you. Contact them, tell them there is this fun Discord based on this channel. Maybe they would connect quicker to the Discord than having to watch my 2-3 hour live streams. I fully understand that. Yeah, but that's about it. I mean, that's a lot to ask for of you, but I'm just saying, right? Sometimes finding a new chatter for the Discord or whatever will be more worth than any super chat. So if that's how you want to contribute, that would be appreciated a lot as well. Thank you so much. I actually had a lot of fun today. I actually learned a decent amount just summarizing everything and listening to Marquez's thoughts. I actually, for once, pre-watched the video, but then I also almost fell asleep during it while pre-watching yesterday. So yeah, that was actually quite informative, and I hope to keep up a somewhat regular schedule. I assume next time I'll be on will depend a little bit on what news and rumors start coming out. Probably somewhere between Tuesday and Thursday of next week, and then around next weekend, whether it's Friday or Saturday and Sunday when Mark Gurman is coming back, I'll let you know. But yeah, this was super fun. Thank you so much. And beyond all the YouTube jazz, just let me know what you would like to see me cover next. That helps me be a better YouTuber, and I'll catch you then. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.